Hey, welcome back to the Blue Collar Off-Road Podcast, episode 67, I believe.
67.
All right. And we got Chris, who a lot of you may remember on Pirate 4x4 as Action Fab. And me and Luke have already talked to him for a solid amount of time. And I think this is going to be a good one. So, for any of you who don't have any idea who Chris is, he's the guy who's got the half drift XJ, half crawler XJ. He's got some really interesting uh, opinions on how I don't know.
All right, hold on. I gotta ask the first question.
All right.
How in the world are you getting enough steering angle with a solid axle in that Jeep to drift?
I think that if I broke the build down, this would make the most sense. So
Yeah, let's
Well,
start there.
it's
get on
it's
in there.
it's an yeah, it's basically like a stock chassis XJ and plated 2x6 box tube rockers that I've moved up to like the first door hinge. It was a four door, but now it looks like a two door based on the way the cage is done. 3,200 pound Jeep. It's JK front axle with JK suspension, so it's mid armed with like aftermarket tubular control arms. I used a male Jeep right hand drive knuckle on the driver's side to basically create a high steer system, and I'm running the drag link to the upper pickup point on the JK knuckles. So when I did that, that changed the Ackerman angle and um, basically it inverted it. So that's the rock crawling setup. And then in the rear, it's YJ leafs, bobbed like 14 inches, spring over. And then I have a really crazy suspension setup with an upper link mount that moves with the motion radius of the spring. So as a leaf spring flattens out, it gets longer and it moves the axle center line back. And as that happens, in up travel, this lower link, flattens out, or this upper link flattens out, and as it droops down and moves forward, it comes down with it. So that link is only like 7 inches long, but in theory, it's like a 27-inch upper link. It just happens to be dynamic.
Huh.
So all of that stays the same. What happens whenever I go drifting is I put in a beam axle that doesn't have a diff in it. Um, I do a or go from spring over to spring under in the rear, and then I basically don't run steering stops with like a really long pitman arm in the front. So I end up with like 48 degrees of steering, 50 somewhere around there, and then I lower it from like a 2 inch lift to like probably -4.
That's
What?
wild.
How how do you even go like I'm guessing so it started out as a crawler or off-road rig of some sorts, right?
Yeah.
And then just one day you were like, fuck it, fuck a 350Z, fuck a Miata, fuck a E36. I'm ripping my shitty XJ. No, I mean, I'm sure yours is great, but I'm just saying, like, I'm gonna run my XJ drifting. How does that come about?
Um, so I had an E46 drift car, and I sold it, and my plan was to buy an M shoe, like the Z3 Coupe. And just whenever I sold that, like prices went through the roof for cars. And so what was like a 7,500 to like $10,000 car became like a 25,000 to $50,000 car.
Oh,
And
shit.
yeah, and so I just wasn't able to find like I was trying to find like a Copart deal or something like that. I knew I wanted a rough car to start with, and I just never could find anything, and it just kept taking off when COVID hit. So I always had this theory that a Cherokee could work. There's been a couple of guys that have autocrossed them, and I come from like a sprint car family. Growing up, we had a race car shop, and sprint cars are live axle front and rear, and they go sideways in a circle. And so I understand the fundamentals of how you can actually set up a beam axle to do what you want it to in a drift. People think that drift cars are like really loose. They're actually gripped up really hard. Like the whole time that you're drifting, I mean, it's trying to peel the tires off. it's not loose at all. You want as much mechanical grip as you can get. And so with my rock crawler, that's exactly what I had done. I had set it up to get as much mechanical grip as physically possible. It just became at that point how you set up the suspension where you have the roll center low enough where it doesn't try to fold over on you, and how do you get, the center of gravity really low? Well, my chassis just inherently has a low center of gravity based on the way I built it. The wheelbase is pretty good for drifting. The power to weight ratio is pretty good. I had a 5-speed in it. It kind of all just kind of made sense. It really just came down to how was I going to get it low enough? And I happen to have enough parts sitting around to fuck with it for free. It didn't really cost me anything but like a bunch of pencil and paper time. So I spent like 2 months R&Ding the thing, and it worked. And
That's
I mean,
fucking crazy.
realistically, yeah, I mean, and realistically, people need to also understand, like, I have totally different driving factors to what push me to do things. It's a lot more of like, I have an idea and I want to implement it and learn from it than it is like, oh, I just want this cool thing that people are gonna see and pat me on the back for.
See, now that's definitely the car guy in you, because like a lot of these guys, they didn't really. I mean, I know Richie had his car, but they've never like seen the car scene. They don't understand that it's all about clout and who has the fucking same Kanzai, whatever the fuck they're called, as everybody else. And like, so I get what you're saying, where it's like you're just out there to have fun and do what you're gonna do, regardless of what your car, vehicle, or whatever it is looks like. And I can respect that because sometimes it's tough to kind of get out of that and just go do your own thing.
Yeah, I've always been one of those people that looked at what everybody else was doing and went the exact opposite way, which has given me some really divergent ideas about what should and shouldn't be done about particular problems. Like at the end of the day, that's what I'm chasing is problem solution and sucking the ideas from my own thumb instead of trying to like cookie cutter it from somebody else's idea.
You
I
know,
will specifically set out to do something opposite of what somebody else did just to prove to myself
Just
that it's
yeah, to see.
I don't
yeah,
need these
it's not about
personal attacks.
so
So,
that's how it happened, and it's been a blast. And it's actually worked out really well because I can treat the car like it's in a race program where I go drifting, I bring it back, I tear it down, I put my other axles in it. And while I have it apart, I've countless times now at this point found issues that I never would have found if I hadn't dug into it. And that has created 2 years now where every single trip I've gone out and wheeled the Jeep, it's been problem free. All right. So the problem is every time I have torn into it, I've found an issue that I had to fix. So I don't know what the exact time is as if I just jumped into it, did it. The last time I went drifting, I swapped the axles the evening before I went, and I had to weld up a mount and do some other work. And I was still done switching the axles out and packing for the trip and loading the Jeep in 7 hours. And
holy
I think
shit.
if I really attacked it, I think I could do it in under 3.
It's impressive.
So it's a 3-link front. So it's basically 3 control arm bolts. The steering is specific for each axle setup, so I just pop it loose at the pitman arm. I change from air shocks to coilovers, but they use the same chassis side mount, so it's just a matter of 2 half-inch upper bolts. The brake calipers swap axle to axle. The braking system is identical, both setups. And then in the rear, it's just a matter of 2 upper control arm mounts, drive shaft, and swapping the calipers and going from spring under to spring over. But the U-bolt setup is super simple because it comes on and off so often that the like threads and everything are nice. So I can zip everything apart with impact tools. Like nothing requires like hand tools and it's all very, very, very easy to work on.
Yeah. Well, I guess
That's fucking cool.
you're just swapping axles, and I guess the hardest part would be that pitman arm change, right? You use a longer pitman arm. So
Yeah, I would say the pitman arm is probably one of the easiest parts. I'd say the hardest part.
yeah, I guess if you take it on and off a bunch, I'm just used to pitman arms that have been on a vehicle for
So
20 years.
yeah, everything comes apart and goes together so easy. I do a lot of maintenance on it, and I've also designed everything where it's so easy to take apart. And I know all the sizes for everything, where it's almost intuitive. And like my axle setup, my rear axle is 176 pounds, and my front axle is like right at 200. So it's like very easy for me to manhandle. I can easily do it by myself.
Oh, so
It's not like I'm trying to throw
Oh, sorry.
800-pound one ton or something like that. Yeah, I'm not trying to throw around like super heavy axles. Like I can pick up the rear and just carry it across the shop.
Wow.
Oh, I pick up the 10.5 that's sitting in the shop right now. I mean, it doesn't have any shafts in it or brakes or anything, but
Not Seagram, you shouldn't have said that part because I was about to say, "Ooh, you so strong," and now you're just cheating.
So you mentioned
Sorry.
earlier how all like drifting is all about like grip and whatnot, and I do know that with typical IRS suspension setups on drift cars, that they will use specific suspension geometries, whether it be through caster, through like camber and all of that. You can change the grip. Now, with you having a solid axle in the rear, how are you combating that without having all those adjustments?
So that's sort of a fallacy. The big problem with IRS is that the suspension changes based on where it is. And like typically weight transfers to the rear and you get a lot of squat. And when you get a lot of squat, the arms go up and the tires fold in. And so a lot of people will basically dial grip in by changing toe. So they'll either toe out, toe in, or they'll run like a neutral toe, basically to get like snap into the car for initiation. Without having those parameters, the only thing that I'm really critical about is getting even tire wear. And thankfully, the rear axle that I used is bent. That's part of the reason why I used it. It was just kind of a axle that was in the scrap pile, and it has a nice like 2.5 degrees of camber per side, which is just enough to pick up the leading edge of the tire and keep it from rolling under. And so I get perfectly flat tire wear. And as far as toe in and stuff goes, I don't have the ability to change how it does like the snap transitions and how it leads into corners and stuff like that. But I can just overcome that with driving skill.
Fair enough. I mean,
everything
shit,
can
that's
be
okay.
overcome with driver skill.
But so,
Yeah.
what motor is in it?
It is a factory 4-liter. And the reason why I'm actually on this podcast is in the last podcast, you who
That would be
somebody
me.
in the,
Luke, I think
in
it
the
was Luke.
podcast. Okay, yeah, Luke had mentioned that I had a supercharged 4-cylinder in the Jeep. And I reached out just to kind of clarify that actually wasn't true. I had built
Lied to us? Is that what you're telling us?
It wouldn't be the
Yeah.
first time.
Fucking liar! Damn, Luke.
No.
Chris that you said told me one time he was I think I was the one. Sorry, no, I'll leave it. Either way, BFG Reds are retreads, and Luke said they weren't, but they are. So I was
I'm
right.
sorry.
Yeah.
I was
But
wrong.
they are. Yeah, I had in my Pirate thread, I had put together a 1.9 Saturn engine, which is like the original architecture that GM went on to use for the Ecotex. And that engine is an aluminum block, aluminum head. My plan was to drop 400 pounds off the chassis and put a turbo on it.
Wow.
After running the Jeep with the 4-liter, I decided I actually liked having weight bias in front and having the heavy 600-pound engine way up in the front of the chassis. And I decided not to do that. And then whenever I started drifting the Jeep, the torque that engine makes is fantastic. It doesn't make a ton of horsepower, but what you really need for drifting is torque. And so it makes like 190 or 200 horsepower, but it makes like 230 foot-pounds. And it has a really linear torque curve. So it basically makes the same torque at like 900 RPM as it does at the end of the RPM range. And it's fantastic. I run a 456 gear ratio and a 26-inch tall tire and a spool. and it has no problem blowing the tires off.
Just such a
That's pretty
weird
impressive.
setup. It's cool as hell. So do you want to tell us about it in the rock crawling setup?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
trying to hear about your setup. That doesn't. That's not what we're here for. I mean,
No,
it's
that's
cool.
exactly. Fuck
It's
you.
cool.
Okay, Graham.
Here
Graham,
for that.
you know what? You say this every fucking time. This is the Rock Rally podcast. Fuck you. We can talk about whatever the fuck we want. People listen to it. You can shut the fuck up, okay? Because
Wow,
I'm
he's
very,
feisty.
very interested in this because this is the coolest thing we've ever had on the fucking podcast in regards to something that's different. So guess what? If we want to indulge a little bit into the drifting side of it, you can fuck off.
Not allowed.
I will tell you
On
this.
YouTube.
I do believe that drifting and rock crawling has a lot in common. I mean, it's both a game of follow the leader. So I think a lot of people would have a lot of fun, transitioning between the two. And I think that there is room for off-road vehicles to be able to do both. It's kind of like rally stage.
Well, we got-
You go between tarmac and dirt. Anyway, as far as how the rock,
Steelies, I could just put
Yeah.
some drift tires on it and take all the air out of the
what is it?
coilovers.
Is it Lauren Healy and Miller Motorsports that does all the drifting or whatever at SEMA
I
with their
can't
buggies?
I
remember.
thought it was the RTR crew that does the
Oh yeah.
drifting at
Yeah,
SEMA.
maybe that's what it is. Anyway, so then the Jeep is set up for off-roading. The other really odd thing about this thing is I built a Dana 30 for the front that holds 37-inch red labels on the hardest trails that you could probably run a 37-inch crawler on and don't have failures. I've done a lot of really special things to that axle to make it hold up. And then I'm running a 44 rear that's also shaved with JK gears. It's 35 spline spool and 35 spline shafts. And it's an 8.9-inch ring gear that I cut back down to 8.4 on the diameter. And then in the front, it's also shaved, full case grizzly, 3-inch axle tubes. Whatever I did to shave, I added a bunch of reinforcement to the housing. And then I also added some gussets to where the upper pinion bearings are in the housing, the head bearings specifically, to keep those from deflecting. So I basically, between the full case carrier and then the housing having more rigidity, I've gotten rid of all the flex that causes the Dana 30s to pop. And then I'm 30 spline inner and 32 spline outer with RCVs.
Oh, see, that's the answer right there. You have RCVs. That's cheating. That don't count.
It's not cheating.
How does
It's
that not
Yeah, it
count?
is.
the best way to go
Because
about it.
because that's just fancy shit. The RCVs cost more
Not
than 3
really.
of those axles. What do you mean?
Yeah, but if
I
you
mean,
can't break them.
They cost the amount of a set of 1 tons. Come on. Come
yeah.
on.
Well,
Yeah, so
so
It's practically 1 tons. I'm kidding. To clarify, and any of the fucking people out there that are gonna post up about
But-
us on Facebook about that, I was kidding.
So you look at a Dana 30, and to most people, it's a throwaway axle. You can pick them up for free. I literally got this axle as a bent housing for free, and I put the 3-inch axle tubes on it to fix it. And the cost that's in the axle is ring and pinion, grizzly, and a set of $1,400 shafts. And then the rear is the nitro kit. So it's like a spool and a set of cut to length shafts, and I think it's like $700.
That's not
So-
that bad when you consider what's done to the axles. It's not how I would have done it, but I think some of that comes from being in New England and with some of New England's quirks.
Well, so we were talking about how New England wheeling is, and wheeling here is actually quite a bit similar depending on what time of year it is. So we wheel to, I'm in central Arkansas. We have Superlift ORV Park here, and then we have S'more up in Missouri, which is snotty, and then we have the Oklahoma stuff like Green Acres, Clayton, Rugged Mountain Ranch, and a couple other places out there that also, when it rains, get really muddy and stuff. So it's not like this setup isn't meant to be able to hold up to like super wet rocks where you have to use wheel speed. It holds up to all of that.
Hmm.
It's just comes down to how heavy do you want the rig, because when you go 1 tons, you have to run a 40, and then you have to have at least 9 inches of vertical separation at the control arms. You have to have at least like certain size heim joints. I'm running a lot smaller components across the entire build that ultimately allows it to be 1,500 to 2,000 pounds under what most people's rigs are, specifically because of the axle setup I went with.
But not to get controversial, but do you also feel that you do not wheel as hard as somebody on 1 tons? And what I mean by that is like, yes, if I were to put 37s on my rig, or like our friend Dan has 37s on his, and his axles are completely stock, but he's also a different style wheeler than what I believe most would consider when they start to talk about built Cherokees. And where do you feel you kind of like fall in that?
I would say I am wheeling harder than a lot of buggies, and I know that because even, for instance, like let's say SRS, so they've come to like the Hot Springs Park, and usually when they come, there's like a buggy shootout at night where everybody just kind of goes up and fucks around, and it's usually a spectacle, and nobody gets in their way. But like I have now more than once gone into the SRS buggy shootout and made the stuff that they were doing easier than they did it.
Impressive.
Wow. Okay.
And the
That, I mean,
reason the
that's
reason is, and I'll tell you the reason, it's because I'm 104-inch wheelbase and I'm 76 inches wide and I'm half the weight. So I'm able to get up into the trails and hit them completely different than they are. Where they're 120-inch wheelbase, my 104 gets down in between the ruts that they make. And same with the width. They're 86 to 90 inches wide. I'm a full 2 feet narrower. So I'm fitting inside of the track width and length of their buggies. And I'm just able to hit lines. And I'm also super, super low center of gravity. I can get the Jeep up where it's completely sideways, and it literally just sits on the sidewall. It doesn't fall over. Like I routinely drive on the sidewalls on my side.
huh.
And I think a
I
major. Oh, sorry.
was gonna say I meant to send you guys some videos today of the Jeep working, just so you could see it, because you could. I kind of alluded to this last night. Like it's allowed me to pick up a different driving style than a lot of people have. That actually makes for really cool video and pictures and all that stuff. But it's kind of a little bit more extreme in a lot of cases.
What are you doing in May?
Do what?
What are you doing in May 14th and 15th?
I don't have any plans.
You should come to Windrock.
No, not Windrock,
AOP.
AOP.
Oh, fuck. I've been telling everybody it's Windrock. Damn.
You said it over the wrong place.
Wait, so that means we're going to like the eastern side? No, western side of Tennessee,
Oh,
right?
no, they're like an hour southern from each other.
Oh, well, I'm stupid, but yeah, you should come. You should come hang out and wheel.
That's fine. I'm going.
Hell yeah! Add another
Sweet.
one to the list. Let's go.
This is going to be
As lo-
quite the
I mean,
interesting
as
trip.
long as it's not like as long as it's not like y'all's 14 people on a trail trip.
It
So
might
it's
be
not. It's gonna be a lot,
cut
but I
hours.
think the way. So pretty much, it's the Trail Trash guys are setting it up. It's the Trail Trash meet and beat. They got the idea from Bleep and Jeep, who did a meetup. But the way that they're setting it up is that they're going to be having groups of people who are running the greens, the blues, the blacks, the reds, and all of that. So there is a decent chance that it's going to be like a standstill. But if we go Friday and we realize that it's just we're gonna be in traffic the whole fucking day, our group of guys who are like want to go out there wheel and like actually get to experience AOP, we're gonna split off like 110%. There's no way that we're gonna just sit there. We're gonna spend 17 hours of driving to just sit in traffic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't get to wheel nearly as much as I want to. And when we do go wheel, it's usually myself and a small group that I wheel with. And we usually like to just, keep moving. And that's not usually the case when you have a huge group.
Yeah.
Correct. It's very difficult.
I like five
But
or
I'm
six.
definitely down to wheel with you guys.
Hell yeah.
Sweet.
Sweet.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
try to make that work. That'd be cool.
That'd be really fucking cool.
and you're not all that far away, so
No,
I
the other
might
side of
just.
Tennessee, we were actually planning. So I'm in the middle of building a Jeep for a buddy of mine, and when it's finished, I mean, we've been deciding on where we were going to go. We were thinking we were going to go back down to Coutemps or Wolf Caves, but I mean, there's nothing set in stone at this moment. Our other choices were someplace in Tennessee. One of the guys that's in our group, he's out of Alabama, and so someplace in Tennessee would be pretty easy for him. Um,
Well, let's hope we can see you guys there because that would definitely. We already have a weird group of people going, just like between rigs or between personalities. So if we add you to the mix, that'll be fucking cool.
I sent a video
Sorry.
over to you guys, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about with how it is stable and runs silly lines.
It reminds
Um,
me of a lot of the little tiny buggies we keep seeing pop up.
Yeah, it
Um,
reminds me of almost driving like a budget moon buggy.
it reminds me of Cricket. I mean, right, it's a Cherokee, but it reminds me of rigs like Cricket and Lemon Drop and all that.
Yeah,
Okay,
Just
I
yeah,
mean,
really
lemon
light,
drops a
small.
stretch. Lemon drops a stretch.
What do you mean? Lemon
no,
Drop is tiny.
But in
lemon
the sense
drop
It's a
of
is
stretch, but it's the same vein of, small, totally different footprint than what's normal going up
yeah.
something
that's
the
fair.
lines just are totally different.
That
and
is
he's
fair.
So
running.
They're
Oh,
not
sorry.
comparable.
lemon
I was
drop is so the guy that owns that is it Andrew?
Ricky
No,
Barrett.
that's not right.
Ricky
Ricky
Barrett.
What
Barrett.
is it again?
Ricky
Yeah,
Barrett.
he he and I are friends on Facebook, and he followed what I did with the 30s, and I don't know this for a fact or anything like that, but we've talked for a long time, and I think that my success with what I'm doing definitely pushed him to solidify that as his axle choice, which then gave him a foundation to decide the rest of the drivetrain. So it's Suzuki Drivetrain, basically with TJ Dana 30s in a rear steer setup, and
Mhm.
it's 37s with like a 104-inch wheelbase. It's the same thing, and he's able to do exactly what I'm doing, where you're in a totally different footprint, and all of a sudden, like a lot of these big climbs that a lot of people have a hard time with, you're taking a totally different line that opens up like a completely new way to hit it, and in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily easier, but you have the ability to do it on a much smaller tire.
Yeah. It's funny to see. I told you, Cody.
What?
Same.
Told me what?
I
What?
mentioned Lemon Drop, and all of a sudden,
Well, okay, because
he
Lemon drops a full-blown tube chassis buggy with it.
with
I was thinking more
influences
the
from
sense of like,
Chris's rig.
I mean,
Small world.
It also reminds me of K-pop Samurai that he had
yes,
before he
that I can get
passed.
behind more than Lemon Drop.
Well,
Lemon
Yeah,
Drop also is running like 14-inch travel air shocks, so I mean,
I mean, if
I'm
you
on
want to
I'm on
get,
12-inch travel air shocks, so I mean it's not that much different.
I heard
yeah,
12. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
um,
12s.
Kevin
12's okay.
Samurai had 14s, and it was Toyota axles with a Sammy motor. I think it was a 1.6, which, toy axles are notoriously strong and all that. But that buggy was a 105-inch wheelbase on 40-inch KR3s, and it did a lot of really cool stuff. But part of that was the fact that, before he passed, Kevin was probably one of the better drivers in New England.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I don't want to also like say that my rig is like one of those things that anybody could get in and go and do what I do. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the fact that I just have a ton of seat time. Um, and it's a manual, that would be difficult for a lot of people. I always joke that I built a Toyota. It's a Jeep drivetrain, but it's still, a torque monster engine backed by a 5-speed with dual cases, and basically the same thing as like Toyota axles as far as diff size and 37s. If you look at most 10 trucks, they're kind of the same setup, and they'll make a lot of rigs look stupid, and it's just the fact that they're lighter and they fit into a different line.
Yeah.
So, how long have you actually been doing this? Because we talked about your seat time before. I've gushed over my fangirling of your previous work in the past, but what's the actual time frame here?
In the late 90s, my family bought a vacation home up here in the Washitas, and we had to buy a Jeep to even get to the property. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like one of those things like we got like the minivan up here, got it stuck, and like the next thing I know, my dad's like, "All right, we got a Wrangler now, like we're good." So, I had been into the chassis fab stuff and like the race car stuff, and like had done dirt bikes and all that. And when we got that Jeep, that just like triggered something in my head, and I got really into like off-roading magazines and stuff like that. And you have to understand, I'm like 12 or 13 at this time, and started sweeping floors at this little mechanic shop. And there was a guy there that had a YJ with like a 350 in it and 2.5 ton Rockwells front and rear with rear steer and like Stasworks double bead locks. Like it was something like I had never seen before. And he started taking me on rock crawling trips. Like this is before I had a driver's license or anything like that. And then the Superlift Off-Road Park opened like right around 2001 or 2002. And when they opened, um, Peterson's Four Wheel and Off-Road had the Ultimate Adventure at the Hot Springs Park.
Oh
And
shit.
at the time, Superlift, Brett from Superlift was doing Superlift TV on OLN. So it was like one of those things where like I had seen the OLN channel, and like they were all the time using Chrysler had kind of made a brand deal with Superlift at the time. And so they were using the Superlift Park for a lot of their filming and testing and stuff like that of like a lot of lift kits. So, like the TJ was like a fairly new platform. There was a lot of hype around that stuff. And it all just kind of converged, and it just happened to be like in my backyard, as you will. And so I started going to the Superlift Off-Road Park. I started going on these wheeling trips with this guy that I worked with. And when I was 15, I bought a Wagoneer, and I put like 36-inch SXs on it and welded the diffs and did like a spring over and, kind of cobbled it together. And that was kind of my first wheeling rig. And I want to say that was around 2000. So I
Okay.
guess I've been doing this like 20, let's just call it 20 years.
I
And you've built
remember.
a ton of rigs too, right? I know we were talking a
Yeah.
little last night. You've gone like it's not like you've never built a 1 ton axle rig. It's just that's, you've been around the block and have found exactly what you want with your setup as it is
Yeah.
currently.
People, so like people know me primarily from Pirate from doing build threads. And, I was always the guy who pushed people to not spend money, but instead pay me to do something really cool. So like I would come up with these harebrained ideas in my head, and then I would find somebody who would financially back the idea and let me put it into, I mean, yeah, and let me put it into reality. And so I got to flush out a lot of ideas, and for the most part, a lot of the ideas that I put out there really did work. There are a lot of off-road products that came about because I made off-road, you know, forum posts. It's like those Genrite Pitman arms, the double shear ones. Like whenever I built the first double shear Pitman arm using like a factory Pitman arm that I cut off, everybody was like, "Oh my God, that's gonna kill, a bus full of nuns." And it worked, and it was awesome. And next thing you know, like 2 years later, Genrite had that as a product. And the same thing with like the Genrite like stretch gas tanks for the JKs. I built one of the first four-linked 1 ton JKs and solved the gas tank issue by using the pump assembly ring that they used to make for the '05, '06 Jeeps, because they have the same like pump assembly hat in a
Mm.
steel tank. And I basically like sent them the pictures of that, and we're like, if y'all will just build this, like, this will solve the problem. And a year later, they had that as a product. And
Wow.
That's
anyway,
awesome.
It's wild.
so
You should have
it's one of those.
copyrighted those before you.
I'm
So,
not. I'm not really that kind of guy. I like to just do what I like to do, and I don't like repetition. I never wanted to be the person that just stamped out the same stuff. Like, I think back in the day, one of the first shops that ever became like really successful was Jimmy's 4x4, and they got the reputation of like the cookie cutter, and like you would see like Cookie Monster memes and stuff like that about them, and that really to my core solidified like what I didn't want to do. I never wanted to be like the shop that just produced like this one like really iconic thing that they just did really well, and that's how you make the money. But that never spoke to me.
so we're gonna take a quick trip down memory lane, and we're gonna turn the clock back about 11 years from the date of recording. I was watching the Southern Rock Racing series, but back when it was like, no, that's you and your pegging. We've covered this. We don't need to keep bringing it up, Cody.
Well, you started
But
getting a little sad there, so I didn't know.
no, there's nothing sad about this story.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Um, so I was watching that. Kish and I were hanging out at my dad's house, and we had pulled it up on the TV, and we're watching like SRRS and, Mad Ram. I think Showtime was Tim Cameron's Buggy at that time, and we started stumbling onto some of like the wheeling videos and whatnot. So I started looking into it a little bit more, and I got on Pirate, and there was this dude named Action Fab building a red ZJ with TNT long arms, if I remember right. And
Yeah. Well, no, TNT had originally built a Jeep that I had, and I was rebuilding the another Jeep with parts from the TNT Jeep. So yeah, I moved a suspension that TNT had built over to it, and in doing so, I redid the link geometry to improve it slightly.
okay,
Okay.
that would we're going off of memory here, so I don't remember that
Yeah,
part.
no, 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 that's fine. That's fine.
But I remember the pictures of it pulled out, and if I remember right, it had like you'd move the hatch forward or something on that. I can't remember exactly, but it was on like 38s or 40s, and I was like, "Holy fuck, that's Cherokee or Grand
Yeah,
Cherokee. You can do that?"
that
And
was one of the first unibody like ZJs that was hardcore. And the big thing about that Jeep was is it was like boat sided. Nobody had ever done like boat sides on a ZJ at that point. And yeah, it was 1 ton. It had a 4.3 Atlas in it. It was a 5.9 Jeep. Um, and I hadn't actually cut the hatch and moved it forward. What I did was I cut the entire back out of the Jeep and then re-sheet metaled it so it was like tubbed so that the tires actually fit correctly. So like it had like a 5-inch stretch, but the wheel wells were cut and moved back, and then like filler panels were built back in their place so it looked like a factory flare was still on it.
Oh shit.
I just remember it was fucking wild to me at that point in time. Like,
Yeah,
never seen anything like that on a ZJ or a Cherokee. It was one of the first builds that I ever like read through the whole thread, and it was just cool shit. It was totally new and exciting at that time.
yeah,
And
I
I've done a
remember
bunch of
you
like
showing me that.
over the years, I've done a bunch of stuff on the forums that really just kind of stuck out and got people's attention, mostly with the unibody stuff. I've had less unibodies than I've had full frame rigs, so I've had like more TJs and YJs and stuff like that. But I think that my ideas about like what you could do with a sheet metal car um, have really kind of become mainstream practice at this point. But whenever I did it originally, it showed people like, oh my God, these are actually something you can do hardcore stuff with. Because at that time, nobody really thought that you could actually wheel those things hard. Like if you put 1 tons in them, they just rip the frames apart.
Well, they're
Take the
not
doors off
wrong.
when they fall apart. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But what
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, one of the first Jeeps, which would have been around that same time, maybe even a little bit earlier, was like a green XJ. And I remember I built like a full frame plate kit that went from front to back. And at the time, nobody offered a frame plate kit. Like if you wanted to plate the frame, you would just use like angle iron and weld it on. And I remember I got a ton of people that wanted frame plate kits, and at the time JCR was like pretty active on Cherokee forum and saw the demand for it and basically took that over. Like within, I would say 6 months, they were like, here's everything that you need. It's all press broke and perfect. You don't have to do all the, like my kit was all flat plate. You had to weld it, like kind of like an R-Tech truss. It was like a whole bunch of pieces you had to weld together. And their kit just like solidified it, where it was just like, this is so easy. You just do it, you know,
Yeah.
and it's done.
Um, I'm pretty partial. I use like the DBM, but I also like the rough stuff kits. But that was,
They're all pretty similar now. You know, there's like a million of them now, but I think JCR was really the first company to really come out with that and sell it on like a mainstream level.
yeah, it was a wild change. What was that other one? There was a trying to remember the name of the company, but I think it was HD Off-Road was one of the OGs too.
Yeah,
Um,
there were a bunch of companies that have kind of come and gone over the years, but
yeah, kind of.
what
Oh, sorry.
as I say, that 2010 era is really when like the unibody stuff took off.
Yeah, and it's odd now that 12 years later, finding a good unibody is starting to get kind of hard.
Yeah,
Um,
the Cherokees are going to become really valuable, uh, probably not too far into the future.
they probably are, and having an unmolested one is going to be wild. Um, but on the other hand, my $300 shit box it's never going to be nice again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be like the guys who built all their like Broncos used to be cheap. You know, they used to be dirt cheap.
oh yeah, now
And
they're ridiculous.
there's yeah, I have several friends that have like $500 Broncos that are, $40,000 rigs now. It's just like, I don't want to body damage this thing, kind of,
Yeah,
you know,
it's insane.
like the
My
guy.
dad.
It's like my go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you're good.
I was gonna say it's like my first rig was like a Wagoneer, and it was like $300, and it's like I've looked for something to replace, that kind of sentimental vehicle in my like in my fleet or whatever, and it's like those things are 10 grand at a minimum now for a good
Yep.
one.
I was just about to bring that up because I've been talking to my dad about potentially me getting a J truck and whatnot, and because he had one when I was super 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 young, like before I would even know what a J truck was. He said he picked up his for like $1,000 back in 2000 and I think well, I would have been like three, so like literally 2000. And nowadays you can't even pick up like a half beaten to shit one for less than like 5 6 grand roughly.
Yeah, is that yellow one? I went
That's
through you guys'
mine. That's
Facebook.
mine.
Yeah,
That's his. Yep.
And it's not. Listen here, Cody. It's not that beat to shit, and it's got
No.
so many doodads for 5 grand. I picked mine up for five, and it's
Well,
in pretty decent shape.
I didn't mean it that way. Yes, it's in nice shape, but like that's because the only ones that are out there that are still running are the ones that were kind of half decently kept. Like
yeah.
otherwise they're rotted.
Mm.
That's what gets them over time is the rust, and that's what's going to happen to all the Cherokees. Like we don't even realize it now, but it's happening to the TJs and the Cherokees, where like they're meeting the first stage of like the rust has destroyed them in like a very critical way where they can't be repaired anymore. And
Yeah.
so like a whole
Yeah.
generation of these vehicles is about to get scrapped. And There's just going to be the ones that got pristinely cared for or lived in the South, and like there aren't that many of those.
Yeah,
And a lot of them have been molested. So
I mean, we saw a
mine.
It
huge
ain't your
diet.
home.
Sorry, Luke and everybody. Uh, we saw a huge cutoff when I first got my Jeep. They were like starting to get more expensive around here. And then, I think there was a year or so where me and a couple of my buddies were super into it, and they were still relatively cheap. And even that was probably more expensive than they used to be, even a few years before then. And since then, it just, plateaued and dropped off. And now they're, to find a good one, you're at least around here is not very easy.
Find
yeah,
a decent Cherokee? Sorry, did I miss the first?
Yeah, yeah.
No, come on. I picked up mine for $500. What do you mean?
Well, yeah,
yeah.
you got to
Oh,
find that sort of deal though. That's not something you can just go on
yeah,
Craigslist and find
No,
or
but
yeah.
we used
Mine,
to.
marketplace.
I used
You
to
talk
flip
to a little old lady
Cherokees.
down the street.
Yeah,
You
no, but I used
used
to.
to. Keyword
Yes.
used to.
Yeah,
I don't
but
know
I
if you
mean, I
still
still
can.
could if I wanted to. I mean, it's a matter of like
Just
knowing
do
the
it.
people that. Why would I? Where am I gonna put them? Am I just gonna shove them in my
In
ass?
your
Like,
in your
no, I
yard.
need a place to fucking put them, Richie.
Find me,
Jesus.
find me a Cherokee for
Give me
$500 that is
done.
in that
Done.
kind of condition.
No, in my kind of condition, that's different. That's no, mine. Yes, obviously, mine is the needle in the haystack. That's fucking different. But if you want to
That's
find one
what
that's
we're
in half
talking
decent
about.
shape with a decent set of third, pardon?
That's what we were talking about,
No,
though.
he's talking about.
Finding
He
the.
was talking about the prices in general, from what I understood, not
Yeah,
just the
I mean,
perfect, absolute most
well,
like exponentially masterpiece of a Cherokee.
no, what I'm saying is like, uh, so for instance, my Jeep was also 500. It had like a blown head gasket, and I bought it from the original owners, and it was bone stock. Those deals are kind of over with. Like people now know that an unmolested XJ has value. It's not just a throwaway car. And at the same time, a whole lot of the Jeeps that were like questionable a couple of years ago are getting to the point now with rust that
Sure.
they're not worth even doing anything with. And so you look at the marketplace and it's like 50% of the marketplace is used and abused lifted Jeeps. 25% of it is bone stock, like well cared for. And of those 25%, I would say more than half of those are rusting away right now and aren't going to be even viable in the coming years.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
yes and no, because if you can still find the older people that have them, and there's a good chance that they just don't know what they have, and they will get rid of them because they have their problems for pretty cheap. But like, if you get somebody driving it, I feel like it's gonna rot a little bit less than just sitting in somebody's backyard.
Yeah, but the amount of grandmas driving Cherokees is limited, and they have a shelf
yeah.
life.
Oh, you guys gotta come out towards my area. I see it all the time.
Listen, well,
I
yeah, for
see it all the
now.
time. I'll
I
see
know, I've
somebody
seen them.
pull into Walgreens and I'll literally just be like, "How much do you want for your Jeep?" And they'll be like, "Oh, it's not for sale." It's like, "Okay, well, here's my number. If you ever want to sell it, let me know." Like, you just got to be talking to people and you get those good
I
deals. I
mean,
had one lady who was wanting like $1,200 for her 98 with like 105,000 miles onto it, but the interior was shot. But like, who fucking cares? Go find another Jeep that has a decent interior. Like,
Like
I
Buckley's.
guess,
Yeah,
but there's
no.
you can
always
look,
going to.
yeah, there are 2.5 million Cherokees made in like 96 alone. Or that's actually not true. Maybe it was 250,000 in 96. Maybe it's 2.5 million altogether. I can't remember
Yeah,
the numbers, but either way, there are a shitload of XJs made. I'm not saying they're going away. I'm just saying the days of Cherokees being $500 vehicles is over.
yeah, like you're not. I'm not gonna go and pull another almost mint two-door out of some guy's backyard because it won't run for $300 anymore. That
Yeah,
kind
no,
of
definitely
thing.
not a two-door.
No.
No way with a two-door, sadly. Um,
That kind of a deal just doesn't come around anymore. And that's kind of like I think what we were trying to get at.
Gotcha. But
Yeah,
I
and
mean, it's
that's
the
what I
same
was
thing with the
really,
240Zs too, though. Like, you can't.
yeah.
I mean, even an E36 nowadays. Sorry to pull it back into the drifting side of it, but it's something that Chris can harp on as well. Is like drift tax. It's fucking insane. A piece of shit rotted to hell. 240 is still gonna run you 6 grand just because it's a 240.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
nuts.
a shell is $3,000 now, and
That's
that's kind of where that's what happened with the BMW thing. Is I sold mine
Mhm.
right before everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and whenever I went to go buy what I actually wanted, the prices had extra, they had gone through the
you
roof.
you had an E46, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like an
Yeah.
E46 back then, you could pick up for like 3,500 bucks for a pretty good one. Nowadays,
No, dude, I paid 600.
wow, see that's even better. Like so wow. I got into it even later than that because to me 3,600 bucks for a pretty nice shaped E46 was a great deal. Nowadays it's like 9 grand for just a pile of poop. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, there
and
was a E46 that wasn't even an M car that was done up. I mean, it had like angle on it and it had like a hydro brake and stuff, and it was a nice little drift car. But like, I think he wanted like 14,000, and 5 years ago that would have been a $3,500 car.
yeah,
Just insane.
and down here there's I'm gonna call it the southern tax. Vehicles down here are worth more than they are up north because they
Well,
last
rightfully
longer.
so. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
rightfully
rightfully
so. Like,
so, but
they're way better
it's
condition.
Yeah,
it's
everything up
just
here is trash.
wild the difference, right? Like my Jeep would probably be a $7,000 rig in New England if I actually wanted to sell it, maybe. Like if I was having a good sale. Down here it's a
What do you
12,
guys
huh?
What do you guys think about the off-road like buggies and Jeeps and stuff like that going through the roof in the last 6, 8 months?
It's annoying.
Uh, as far as cost, I don't know. I I've never I've always enjoyed the building side of it. Like it's not to me it's everybody's always like, "Oh yeah, well doing the stages is stupid because, you're just spending more money." Well, I like it's how I've learned how to do everything I know how to do. I wouldn't trade my phases of building things for anything because if I hadn't done them, I wouldn't have learned how to do anything. So building or not building, buying a buggy for however much they're going for nowadays just has never even crossed my mind. It's just not how I'd like to do it.
But
I'd rather spend twice as much. Hmm?
you also
Yeah,
don't want a buggy, I think is the thing. Like
Oh no, I'd
some
take a buggy, but I'd want to build it. I wouldn't want to buy somebody's, you know, buggy built for them versus buggy built for me. If I'm building a buggy, I'm building it for me, not for anybody else. That's sort
that's
of
fair. That's fair.
yeah, I agree with you. I've actually never been like a buy a rig kind of person. I just have fun cruising all uh the off-road oriented for sale pages on Facebook, and I just can't believe people are paying for really shitty rigs. Like, there are so many home built rigs that just aren't done right that people are giving stupid money for. Um, I just didn't know what y'all's opinion was of that.
I mean, it's gonna happen. I don't know why the sport blew up, but the sport did blow up in 2020.
Well,
There are
people
more.
people who bought all the JKs are now like looking to move on from their bolt-on rigs. I see a lot of that, and then just I think COVID pushed a lot of people to follow their dreams instead of sit on a pile of cash that they maybe were thinking that they were going to retire on, and now they're looking at it like, well, is that
Yeah.
money even going to be worth anything? Whenever I retire, I might as well have fun now. And I don't know. There's probably a lot of different things. Like almost everybody that I know that owns a business is doing better than they ever have. They've had record years, and for everything that inflation does, like there is a ton of money on the marketplace. So, all of it kind of comes together to come up with like some inflated prices. But overall, I do
Yeah,
think that the used market is just out of its mind at the moment.
oh yeah, and
I
more
will
than
tell
just
you
buggies.
that it's not just buggies as well. Currently, there's some, not to divert too far, but we've already covered inflation. There's this weird thing going on in the gun world right now where you can buy a gun at the gun store
Oh, God.
and sell it private party down here for more money than you paid for it by like another 120 bucks. It's
Yeah, because they're felons, so
wild.
they don't want their background checked. What do you
No,
mean? No
not even
shit.
felons.
Okay. I thought you were just telling us how to illegally sell guns. My bad.
No, I mean like, um, I sold
Said,
my spare AK to my buddy, and he's not a felon. I've watched him buy stuff in the store, but like, you can't get stuff, so you're on a 3-month wait list to get,
oh, well then,
XYZ thing, and then it
duh.
goes for $800 when you paid 700 for it,
Yeah,
and
that's a
it's
simple
just
supply and demand.
yeah, but it's in everything, and there's a much larger demand across all kinds of weird fields.
Yeah,
Um,
we're in the horse sale business, and like horses right now are going for
What
crazy. Like,
breeds?
it's English, so like off the track thoroughbreds and warm bloods and
Shit, that's
different
really
types of
cool.
ponies,
Hmm.
stuff like that. But either way, I'm just saying like it is in all walks of life. Like I think that everybody's probably dealing with the same stuff. The difference is like with the off-road stuff, like somebody built that, and for the most part, the stuff that's fetching a ton of money isn't built right.
So,
so
can you confirm that a Cherokee is roughly 200 horsepower?
No, it's less than that. I think I think wheel horsepower is probably closer to like 150,
So
140 at the most.
150 horses you think would be a good tug of war with a Cherokee?
Uh, I mean, I don't think that horsepower. I don't think that you can actually use the term horsepower and like apply it to the power of a horse.
What?
It's not really.
You telling me that was a lie too? Oh
No, at
man,
one
my
point in
fucking
time,
life
No,
is
no,
in
it
shambles.
was
Horse inflation.
Dude,
It's a
Horse
problem.
yeah,
inflation, they're too small nowadays. God dang it. I'm just kidding.
it
I
was a
just
psyop by yeah, it was a psyop, man.
so, all right. Mr. Chris, put your dukes up because now it's time because I was told you were giving me some shit. So I'm buckled up, ready to have this quite fucking right rumble. Let's fucking get it, buddy.
I might have gotten
Okay.
confused and it might have been Kish, which
Oh,
he's much less likely to put up his dukes
No,
about.
no, because
oh,
I know Chris had opinions on his whole cage and one
oh,
tons and
oh, cool. Yeah. So,
not doing um basically
I
just
just I just listened. Yeah, I just listened to a couple of podcasts where you were trying to figure out what you wanted to do with this cage, and like you're basically between this point of like, do I spend a bunch of money on tube and make my rig safe, or do I put money elsewhere in the rig? And like you're trying to follow a bunch of guys who have kind of moved beyond the trails you feel comfortable doing. Am I on the right path
yeah.
with that?
Well, you're sounds to me like you're about 6 episodes behind because I do believe we came to a somewhat agreement, well, I've come to a more epiphany, if you will, that what I feel that I should do, but I'm all ears if you want to
Well,
give your
let
opinion.
me let me let me hear what you've solidified as your trajectory.
So the cage is still to be determined. The cage is happening first before the one tons, 110%. There's no doubt in my mind that that will be happening. A matter of if it's going to be internal or exterior is going to be based off of what Graham and I come to the conclusion of because I have also like 100% decided that I will no matter what be going with Graham building me a cage just for the simplicity of I do not have the availability to make it happen, and also I'm a fucking piece of shit welder. So I choose life, and I think Graham has done a pretty good job with making his cage, and he has somewhat of the availability to make that happen in a okay timely manner. And I'm projecting like a month, 2 months. According to Graham, he says it's gonna be quicker than that. But also, we saw what happened
probably
with Luke's Jeep, so like I don't know. Um, but
So what's your idea of what you want to do with axles then?
axles, I mean, as of fuck, what was it, 2 podcasts ago, I kind of came to the conclusion that my rig is going to be staying on the current setup. Like meaning the
Yeah.
Dana 30, gonna throw chromos at it. The
You should you have you read my Project Millionaire uh build thread?
Will you be upset if I say no?
No, I don't care whether either way. I'm just asking if you are familiar with it or not.
Then no. To be honest
Okay.
with you, I knew who you were without even knowing who you were. I heard about your
Okay.
Jeep, I heard about the build, and then all of a sudden you sent me a message saying, "Hey, like blah blah blah, this is who I am." And I'm like, "Oh, this guy seems cool." And then I sent it to these guys and they were like, "Yes, 100% yes, 100%." I'm like, "Oh fuck, I should go learn who this guy is because he seems pretty cool." Like
Okay.
I
No, no. Well,
so
I don't care either way if you've seen it. I actually like the axles that are in your Jeep. I don't necessarily think you need to get rid of them. Um, my biggest thing that I took away from a lot of what you've said in the past is that you need experience. And people can tell you what to do all day long, but until you actually go out there and, learn the hard way, like it's not going to give you the right ideas in your head. You're just going to be going off of what other people have done. And so when I think about that and like look at what your Jeep is, like I think you should basically sacrifice that Jeep and just know that it's going to be your seat time rig and it's going to get torn up. And eventually you're going to build something else. But that could be 10 years from now. But in the meantime, it's going to teach you all the lessons that you need to learn. It's like a video game. Like you can put all the cheat codes in and all that stuff and get through all the stuff. But like if you don't ever actually play the game, at the end of the day, you're not going to be good at it, right? And it's not going to have been like a super fun game anyway. So I know that you're working on like a budget, and by doing a 1-ton swap and all of that, it becomes like a snowball effect. You do one thing, then you have to do this, and then you have to do this, and like you're just working on it and you're not getting trail time. So I would just focus on keeping it light and not putting like a bunch of stuff that's going to weigh it down. That way the axles survive. Um, you already have like a pretty nice little lightweight bumper setup in the front. I would cut it down just slightly and throw a winch behind it. You can cut a plate uh, or cut the plate in the front for a fair lead and actually bolt the winch underneath the radiator.
clarify, you're
And
talking
then
to the
as
guy
far
with
as
the black Jeep, just because I think you're talking about because my bumper is
oh,
as small as
no,
it's
same,
going to get.
yeah, same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can put a winch behind that, and I would just put a B pillar cage in it, and basically do a halo hoop behind the seats with an X brace or a B brace, and then do two door bars that come beside the seats on either side that go down to where like the footwell is in the driver and passenger side, and then tie it into the roof. And if you want to put a rub rail down the side, put a rub rail on it, but I wouldn't do like a halo and all that stuff. I would just try to use as little tube as possible, keep costs down, make it where there's enough room inside for people to still sit in the back seat and stuff.
I don't have a back
And
seat.
at least if you rolled it, well, even if you
Even better.
didn't, yeah, if you rolled it over, at least it wouldn't hurt you.
So
Like,
that's I had that like mindset originally. Back about 6 months ago, that was kind of my idea of just doing like a simplistic like internal Halo A B with like support Cs. That's what I was thinking, just so that way I have a cage or at least a roll bar of sorts, so that way if it rolls over, that I will be safe, my passengers will be safe. Something that most of my friends who have experience with building full rigs, and by full rigs I mean like cage 1 tons, that sorts, like who have already gone through the trials and tribulations of everything, really stress the idea of cry once, buy once, or buy once, cry once kind of thing, and or do once and just like do it right, get it done, because otherwise I could dish out the, I don't know, roughly $1,500 in tube, dish out the money to Graham to weld it up for me, but in a rollover that's heavier than just a simple flop, if the cage crushes, then the unibody's gone, and that cage and the money and time that was put into that simple cage will be for nothing. And
well, so that's true. That's true. But I will say this. I have rolled unibodies caged and not caged, and they all tweak. I think Graham, you haven't rolled yours, but one of you guys was talking about where you rolled yours and the Jeep is now twisted. Like you can totally see it. Like if you look through the
It
cage.
wasn't even a roll. It was a
Yeah,
really
Yeah,
hard,
your rear is fucked.
yeah.
yeah. So that's so you can do all this stuff and it doesn't matter. It's still connected to a sheet metal body. So um, box tube rockers with a boat side is probably the best thing you can do to stiffen an XJ. And
I
then
cr
beyond that, like if you roll it, you might have to clip another roof input on it, which is something that can be done to an XJ. You can actually cut the roof off of one XJ and put it onto another. Like that's not a very difficult process to do. And you can pour to power them out and like you can get them back straight and get windows and stuff back in them. But what I'm stressing is keeping the weight down because that's going to make or break whether or not you can successfully run the axles that are underneath of it and have fun doing it. Because next thing you know, you add, let's say a cage that's like 400 or 500 pounds. Like not only is that 400 or 500 pounds on the rig, but it's 400 or 500 pounds that's like at the highest point. So it's going to really affect the stability of it. And
I
then, you
I
get
noticed
add
the
a whole
weight in
bunch of,
mine when I put the
yeah,
cage on. It definitely changed the center of gravity big time.
big
Hmm.
time.
Yeah,
Um, and so the axles, like, we were talking about RCBs being cheaters, but like that's a cry once, buy once thing.
Mm.
And like if you put your money towards stuff like that, and like as far as like the suspension goes, like the way my mid-arm JK stuff is set up, all that stuff was dirt cheap. You can get that stuff used from other JK people that are like upgrading and things like that. Or you could even run like just factory JK control arms. They're box tube and people give them away for free. Um,
That's
Kish
and
what
that's
Richie
actually
has.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh,
We picked up a 44 for my girlfriend, and it actually came with the control arms, which like we were like, oh, this sucks. We get to cut this shit off, but it ended up being like a really nice blessing because Richie was able to get. I don't even. Did we even make you pay for them, or if you did, it was like almost
25
nothing.
bucks.
Yeah, which was awesome because then he was able to make his front suspension setup even better off of it. And you're right, like for what they are, they're pretty solid. They're boxed control arms and they're dirt cheap. Like
yeah.
I think they stretched your front 2 inches or so, which is that's great,
Inch
Um,
you
and a
know?
quarter?
And you can
no, it was
and you
more
can
than
actually
that.
buy and you can actually buy them from the parts store. Like if you go up to O'Reilly's, like and just ask for a JK control arm from Dormant. Like if you're anywhere near a hub, but like you can have them the next day. So let's say you're wheeling someplace and you taco one. Like if you ordered it that afternoon, like you could have it in the morning and keep wheeling.
Shit,
Um,
that's true. I've never even thought of that. That's really cool.
Yeah,
yeah,
Richie's got a really cool little setup going on. You want to explain it, Richie?
Well, it's the rear upper control arms from the JK are my front
No,
lower arms.
no, the lowers.
Nope, those are uppers.
Those are really?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh,
they
okay.
have,
Sorry, I'll shut up. My bad. My bad.
so they have the bend in them then.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that bend works out perfectly because it actually uh allowed me to have more steering angle without
Right.
eating my tire,
Well,
which was nice.
that's how the yeah, and that's how the front JK arms are. And what's cool is like so where the lower control arm bracket is on the XJ, where it's like on the angled part of the frame as it like goes up.
Yeah.
You cut that off. That you cut that off just like you're doing a long arm. But then where it flattens out underneath the belly, there's that section of frame that's like just slightly lower, just right in front of the cross member. You basically just build a little bracket that mounts right there, and if you have frame plates, like it's on the frame plate, and you just hang the control arm there and use your factory axle side bracket. And it's the same way. It has like a bend in it for the tire, so you end up with like I call it like a mid arm. So it gives you the same static geometry like a long arm would. So it rides nice on the road. It gets the control arm bracket lower, so you have more vertical separation between the frame side brackets, which give you better control of the axle, better or I guess anti dive as you stop. Like there are nothing but positives to doing it, and it's probably the cheapest way to go. you can even leave your upper control arm where it's at. Like you don't even have to move it if you don't want to. I have JK control arms, top and bottom, but I mean, you could just leave your factory XJ control arm or get like an adjustable one for the top.
Okay.
But my point really is just keeping it light. Like the 29 spline 8 1/4, fantastic axle, totally weldable. If you go on my Project Millionaire build thread, I show how to shave one of those, and it gets rid of that obnoxious lip. It's the easiest axle ever to shave. You literally just weld a piece of flat plate into the bottom of it, and it's a sacrificial axle anyways. Don't spend any money on it. Just weld the spider gears, and same
Yep.
thing in the front. Don't spend a ton of money on it, but you do need RCV shafts. And if you order RCVs, I would buy it with the JK stub shafts and do the JK unit bearing conversion, because it will give you 32 spline instead of 27 spline, and buy a full case locker. And if you buy a full case locker, you could get like a Grizzly, and then it's like a $550 locker. It's only a couple $100 more than a Carrier and a Lunchbox, and it's infinitely more rigid, so you don't have the gear deflection. And then you could go 30 spline inners, and all of a sudden you have basically like a JK44 axle with just a slightly weaker ring and pinion.
So, regardless of the RCVs and all of that, actually, I don't think regardless was the word that I was thinking. My apologies. Pretty much, how do you feel that a Dana 30 will survive by taking away that fuse point of the axle shafts? Because for me, it's tough for me to agree that 100% that a 30 can be bulletproof with still such a small ring gear. I mean, I've witnessed Dana 44s snap axle shafts even with chrome ollies. Like,
So
how
my theory on this, yeah, and we talked about this with last night. One of you guys built like a Dana 44, and it was just a nightmare.
runs, yes.
I think it was Luke.
Yeah, that
Oh,
was
Was
me.
it Luke?
Yep.
Okay, so the Dana 44 is a pretty poor upgrade over a 30, mostly because they use a 760 shaft. So like, even if you have like a 296 and you put chromos in it, it's going to upgrade you to a 760 joint at the most. So like, that's going to be your weak link. And if that's not the weak link, it's going to be either like a 16 spline stub shaft or a 27 spline stub shaft for like the TJs. And like, let's say you're running a low pinion 44. The low pinion 44 in a front application is no stronger than a high pinion 30 in a front application, due to the reverse rotation of the 30 being on the drive side of the gear instead of the toe side. And then you start looking at what really causes an axle to fail. It's not necessarily the component size. In the case of the Dana 30, it comes down to deflection. So primarily the housings themselves are thinner, and they don't have as much like casting material in them, which is why you see like Toyota guys being able to run much, much larger tires with a very comparable size gear set. It has nothing to do with the fact that the Toyotas are underpowered, because people put huge reduction boxes in them and pour tons of torque into those differentials. What it really is about is the fact that the differential in the Toyota uses a third member that is much more rigid than the casting that Dana used for the 30s. And the same thing with a lot of the Dana 44s. There's a bunch of different Dana 44s out there, and some of them are better than others. Like the TJ low pinion Dana 44 is not nearly as robust as the Wagoneer low pinion Dana 44, or the K series Dana 44 that was used in the 70s pickup trucks. So like, you have to really put that into consideration. But there's a lot of things that you can do to get rid of deflection. The biggest thing that I see with the 30 that people don't do is they don't spend money on a full case locker. And so we already talked about this with the Dana 50 off air, where what actually caused the Dana 50 to break wasn't that the gear set broke, it was that the carrier broke in half. And that's what happens with a lot of like Dana 35s and Dana 30s. And so if you put a full case locker in it, you put a heavy duty diff cover on it, and you cut the bottom of the housing off, and you put real 1/2 inch plate back in its place and shave it and weld that all in solid and put a nice truss on it and really get the housing where it doesn't deflect, the ring and pinion will hold together.
That makes sense.
Okay.
The Toyota thing is what really sold that for me. Is those have maybe I don't know
They're
about
an
the
eight. They're
newer
an
ones.
8 inch. I mean, most of them are 8 inch. It's not that
Yeah,
much bigger than a 30.
it's that third member, and then those axle housings themselves are just these beefy. The entire housing that the third member goes into is just all beef.
Yeah,
It's not thin in any spot, at least by the looks of it.
yeah,
I've never really
Yeah.
worked
yeah. I
on
mean,
And
many of
then
them.
they sell the kit to plate the bottom, truss it, and then weld on that like little skull cap over where the diff goes. So by the time that you've done that, you're going from what, 3/16 to quarter-inch housing up to 5/16, 3/8 in some spots.
it's all about making the housing rigid. And that's the thing that I see people not doing. And so there's a lot of lore out there now in the off-road community about how a Dana 30 and even like the Dana 35. But like they used to make a Super 35 kit. And people would cheap out when they bought the Super 35 kit because it was like $1,500 or something like that. And it was a ARB that was 30 spline, a set of 30 spline shafts, and usually you got like your ring and pinion with it. But for like an extra $300, there was like this big heavy duty diff cover that had like two webs that went all the way out to like the brakes on either side and like bolted around the housing and basically was like a backbone. And
Yeah.
if you didn't put the backbone in when you put the Super 35 kit in, the ARB would explode. So like the ARB would literally like break in half and like the ring gear would just like fall over sideways. It was like whenever a 10 volt breaks, like where the whole differential just scatters. And it just came down to the fact that the housing doesn't have a big enough axle tube, and the casting of the Dana 35 is so weak that it allows the preload on the side bearings on the carrier to open up and allows the carrier to walk back and forth. And whenever that happens, it basically just like puts like a side load on the shafts and the whole center section of the carrier breaks, like all the spider gears and everything. It all just loads up and just comes apart. So that's the biggest problem that I see, and people don't really put that into consideration. And there's nobody out there that's really advocating like, load bolting axles and
Load
shaving
bolt
them and putting like,
35.
I mean, load bolt any axle. I don't actually have load bolts in my 30, but I mean, it's the same theory. I mean, you're just strengthening the housing to keep it from deflecting.
Yeah.
And, how do I put this? A lot of this advice is very good. Um, there's also different, like, for me, this wouldn't work. Just, I like a heavy rig. I don't know why, but I like the way
Yeah,
that
it's
my
what
rig is. Um, and I wouldn't want to change it. But if I was building a buggy, maybe building a set of JK44s with RCVs would be the route to go and try
I think
something
that the
different.
JK, yeah, I think the JK axles are the next big thing, and you already see it with the prices. But I think that there are a lot of people that are figuring out that you can run a 40 on a JK axle and have way more ground clearance, better steering angle, less scrub radius, um, a lighter weight package, and ultimately a rig that's more capable than the conventional 1 ton route.
Yeah.
But
On the other
as
hand,
far as
though,
like,
I'm balancing the
uh,
budget. We talked about this before, but it was cheaper for me to build the 1 tons than it would have been to build JKs. Uh,
yeah, for sure, the JK axles are expensive. I mean, it's a $10,000 proposition to do JK axles
Yeah.
for the most part.
Really?
I mean,
Yeah.
they're 40. They're like their Rubicon 44s are easily 1,500 to 2,000. Easily.
Yep. No, they're more than that.
Stock?
So
Oh,
a pair of stock axles right now on the marketplace is going for about 3,500. That's just factory lockers, factory shafts. So then you have to put all the other supporting modifications in. And whenever you do the swap, there's steering to deal with. You're going to have to set up the links, however. I mean, there's more than just like buying the axles. And the other big problem is the majority of people that are selling them are buying crate axles, which require them reusing their outers. So the majority of the axles that you buy don't have brakes and don't have knuckles. So that's also another like expense that most people are going to incur. Don't get me wrong, you can get good deals, but for the most part, it's a $3,500 to $5,000 set of axles, and then you're going to have to do drive shafts and brakes and
Myself in the
all
balls
your
when I
other.
was offered one for $1,500.
So the way to do it on the cheap is to buy somebody's bent axle, and the way you fix them. So Synergy sells a sleeve kit that you're supposed to slide in, and it's supposed to keep the axles from bending because they use the same axle tubes on the JKs that they had in the TJs, but they widen the axle 5 inches and they put it underneath the Jeep that's 2,000 pounds heavier. So you can kind of see what would happen there. And basically, they bend at the outer control arm bracket. So there's these sleeve kits that they sell that go on the inside and basically double the wall thickness. But if you buy one that's bent and doesn't have sleeves already in it, you can just cut the axle apart, and you can even like pie cut it and basically get it where that axle tube is able to move. You put the sleeve through and use the sleeve to straighten it. It doesn't work if it's bent actually at the housing, like at the cast center, but it works for, I'd say, at least 75% of most of how JK axles bend. So it's pretty easy to buy a bent axle and straighten it, is my point.
And
Well,
people
that's
probably sell
interesting to
what do
know.
they sell bent axles for? They've got to be cheap, right?
Yeah,
Most people's
I
mind,
have
that's got to be useless. It's
Yeah.
junk.
well, the best way to do it is to get with like your local repair shops that are fi- fixing them for insurance companies.
Mm,
If you can get on that deal, like a lot of times you can get it for free, and it'll just be, like one of those
Friend that
deals where
works
you just
at a
grab it.
Jeep dealership and they just throw them
Yeah,
in the back and people can grab them for scrap because they legally can't scrap them. I
correct.
I
It's like
turned
a
down a bent Gladiator 44, like a 2020 Gladiator 44, because I was like, oh, it's fucking bent. What the fuck am I gonna do with that?
well, you won't be doing that anymore.
Nope. Nope.
I, I probably shouldn't be telling people how to do this, but yeah, I
You
mean,
can
if
cut
you can
this. We can
if you
cut this
can
part.
find yeah, if you can get with like your local body shop and just tell them, hey, next time a JK comes through here that's wrecked, because they all bend if they wreck in the front,
Yeah.
and insurance is like in on this. Like at this point, like insurance is like, oh, it's a JK, it needs an axle, and so they just write that into the estimate every time, and a lot of times it's like throw them a pack of beer and you can get it, or pay the dudes like tool bill for the week, or kind of deal. You can usually get one. So
Yeah,
that's
that's a good way
that's the way to
go
do it
about it.
on the lowdown.
Um, so, it's not every time or every day that we get to talk to Action Fab. What's your take on all these fancy 9-inch builds that are coming out?
I'm not particularly a big fan of third member axles. Um, Most people think I'm crazy for that take, but all of the third members that are low pinion have the pinion really far down on the ring gear, which aids in high point angle. So that's why like a 9-inch is actually stronger. Everybody thinks it's the third bearing support, but the third bearing support isn't actually a load holding bearing. It's just a roller bearing. There's no preload on it or anything, so it doesn't change deflection. The real reason why a 9-inch is stronger is the high point angle on the gears
Oh,
is longer.
oh, we had this discussion before about the hyphoid angle on a 10.5 versus the hyphoid angle on a 14 bolt.
Yeah, the 14 bolt has like a way better high point angle.
Who?
The 10 bolt.
Wait, what? Wait, Wangle?
10.5.
What the fuck?
All right, so
Sterling?
let's back up.
Chinese are you guys speaking?
All right, so let's back up. So where the pinion sits in relation to the ring gear
Yeah.
basically dictates the angle at which the gear is cut. So if the pinion is lower, it's on the radius that's like most flat or parallel with the ground. And so the gear angle at that point goes like catty corner from one edge to the other, from the outside edge to the inside edge. As it moves up on the gear, it becomes flatter. So that distance becomes shorter and shorter as it moves up the ring gear. That means that the surface area of the tooth between the crown and the deepest part of the void is larger and larger as that gear tooth becomes longer, and that means that it's stronger. So with like a 9 inch or a 10 bolt, I mean not a 10 bolt, a 14 bolt, the gear tooth length is very long, and most people think that both of those axles are strong because they have a third bearing support, and that's just not true. So anyway, yeah, high point angle is great on the 9 inch stuff, but in my opinion, the pinion height is a detriment, and I would much rather have a different axle that didn't have the pinion dragging the ground all the time.
So in a
Well,
rear application, though, is it still a worthy contender?
I mean, just just personally, I wouldn't choose it. I just think in a rear application. So here's the problem with most 9 inch builds. Number one, the axle that you buy is very unlikely to have a nodular third member, and that opens up a can of worms. You end up buying a nodular third, and then you buy a gear set, and then you buy a carrier. And if you're going to buy a carrier, you might as well do 35 spline. And so at the end of the day, your junkyard axle is just a housing that you could have bought for $300 from a Circle Track magazine.
I
And
probably
then
should
it's
have
just a great.
I
Go
probably should
ahead.
have phrased this a little bit better. I meant like the custom nines that are coming out, for example, like the rough
Like
stuff
spider tracks.
housings. Uh,
Yeah. So like in the crate axle world, the 9 inch stuff just isn't particularly attractive to me
okay.
because once again, you're having to buy all the components. So it really is like a crate engine kind of type thing where it's like you're buying like a dart block and all this stuff. Like it's all really expensive componentry that you're still left with an axle that drags the drive shaft all the time. And
Hmm.
so then it's like, all right, if I'm going to run this axle, I want a high pinion. Like in a rear application, a high pinion 9 inch isn't particularly strong um, comparative to like the shafts that you would run. In a front application, it's great, but then you're dealing with like weird axle seal situations and stuff like that. And I just think that the aftermarket has come through with better options from like companies like Dynatrac, where you can buy Pro Rock housing for like $2,500 and use fairly common off the shelf stuff. Um, I would much prefer to build like a Dynatrac or a Rock Jock and stuff it full of kind of the same componentry and have a better pinion setup than with the 9 inch.
That's interesting. I'm gonna continue to stand for my junkyard 60 and 10.5. I think it's probably one of the best combos you can put in, but
round
I do
here.
agree, especially up north where all those trucks rust and those are
Yep.
$500 axles. That's a fantastic setup. My only complaint about those is the weight.
yeah,
And
they're
I guess
heavy.
marginally also the scrub radius on the front. I really don't like the offset between the wheel mounting surface and what the pivot point of the knuckle is on the Super 60 and even like the 0405 stuff. Like just the amount of scrub radius that those axles have is really obnoxious with an aftermarket wheel. I think you guys have actually done the right thing by running the factory wheels. Those axles need to be run with the factory wheels, in my opinion.
Yeah, I ugh I mean even with the factory wheels, it's not great. Turning sucks and whatnot, but I mean it really
Well,
sucks it in. And you don't I got a lot of people asking questions about the backspacing on the wheels because it really pulled them in. And I didn't realize it until I just got bead locks for my new tires and it pulled it way out and it looks totally different now, and it's way wider. I didn't realize how tucked in it was till I put this other set of wheels on. So,
Yeah, and not only is it way wider, but now it's going to start wreaking havoc on your steering system unless you go full hydrant. So,
yep.
if you run those axles with a steering box, you're basically guaranteeing that you're going to rip the box off the frame, you're going to break sector shafts, and you're going to absolutely have to run some kind of a hydro. You're probably going to need a pretty large diameter ram, which is going to slow the steering down to a point where it's kind of obnoxious. And then you're going to put a lot of heat into the system trying to move all that fluid all the time. And so you're going to just constantly be eating up pumps.
I see. I say you just like propane cool your steering fluid. That'd be good.
What?
I mean, yeah, there's way easier solutions like 2-power steering pumps or something like that. But yeah, I get what you mean.
I was just fucking around. We were going on a really long streak of like super informational, like super good conversation that I had to just throw in something.
No,
dumb.
this is like gonna be a total tech one, Cody. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. And that's why like, and it's good because we haven't had one in a really fucking long time. So I'm absolutely loving it. It's just a matter of like, there's a. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I can get as deep into the weeds as you guys want. My father-in-law is like all about how I only speak jargon. So,
I mean, I'm
this
here
is my
for it
natural.
because I'm used to me and Graham being like bouncing back and forth off of each other. And for once, we're the people that are asking the questions, and it's kind of cool.
And it's
Yeah.
great. And I can ask questions like, what's your favorite raccoon fact? I don't know. You might not even have one, but maybe one day you will.
We've raised raccoons, so I have my opinions about raccoons
What?
too.
Hold on, Richie. Get in here, buddy. This is our time to shine.
Listening. I heard
Raccoon racing.
I heard
What?
coon and I got
No,
excited.
no, not racing. I've raised like
Okay.
we
I'm
have,
less excited, but I'm still interested. Give us some
My
facts.
excitement definitely quelled quite a bit. But my interest still peaked.
So, okay. All right. So since you didn't race the poor bastards, which would have been really fucking cool, just throwing it out there. If you ever wanted to, I'm in. Like, we could definitely come up with like a pro raccoon racing league. Like, I'm down. But
dude,
give us-
raccoons are like the laziest. They're basically like they're cats, but monkeys. That's a raccoon. They're basically like they sleep all the time, and then whenever they are awake, all they do is eat, and they have hands with thumbs.
So what you're telling me is that just gave me like Wizard of Oz kind of vibes of like the flying monkeys, but like now they're cats.
Yeah, I mean they're basically pandas, but feline.
Trash pandas.
Dude,
Yeah, that's
definitely
exactly what they
give
are.
give us a quirky raccoon fact. Like I need one. I need one in my life.
So the raccoons will like bring girls back to their house and show it off if they have like a cool pad. So like if you
What?
raise raccoons and let them loose around your house, they'll like go off and like get like a mating partner and bring them back to the pad. So
What?
I think that's kind of fun.
That's
House has gotta look
amazing.
good.
Dude, that's the coolest shit I've ever heard. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
back in. I'm clocked in now. This is fucking awesome.
So raccoons are definitely clout chasers.
So how the hell does one get into racing raccoons?
We live on a farm, so whenever like animals get injured or something like that, like it's basically springtime comes every year. There's some kind of an animal around here that needs a mother, and so like we end up
You
with
take your shirt off and give him the old teat job.
no, but we definitely
Oh.
feed them with syringes.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay.
What about
So-
ducks?
So
Kinda
every
doing
year
like a
there's
little
some kind of
rehab.
yeah. So like we've done all sorts of different birds and raccoons and like squirrels and cats and you name it. So got all sorts of crazy animals around here at all the times.
Which one's been your favorite?
Have you
Did it
had
have a name?
llamas?
Oh, fucking
We
llamas.
have not done llamas.
No.
We've done donkeys. We've
What?
done sheep. Yeah, I did
There's
not like
a
the sheep. We have Go ahead.
There's a surprising number of people in my town in Harrington here that raise llamas.
Dude.
Yeah, I don't get the llama thing. I don't know, man. It's
I
just
don't
cool
get
being
it
part of
either.
nature.
Well, if
Yeah,
also Richie, if you had listened, he says that he like commandeers the animals like because they're hurt
They're
or
in hell.
whatnot.
They need
So
help.
like no, yeah, not like for llamas. I feel like llamas
You're
don't.
not just gonna find a llama
Listen,
that needs
listen.
help.
No. You in Harrington, you will because they break out all the fucking time. Okay.
that's hilarious.
Route 4 got shut down one time because the llamas got out.
What?
Jesus.
That's hilarious.
Dude.
So
Anyways,
yeah,
we could go back to technical talk. I just had to break the ice a little bit, and now you
the
gave it life, so I'm here for
yeah.
it.
The thing that I think that most people skip on pretty much any axle build is shaving the axles. So I started
Guilty.
shaving diffs.
Guilty.
Yeah, I started shaving diffs in '05 or '06. And I basically posted like a picture to Pirate of like a Dana 70 with the bottom just cut off of it. And everybody lost their mind. And I plated it back on. And it was basically the same shape of like a Dynatrack axle. That was what I was trying to do, was basically build like a free Dynatrack. And ever since then, I've shaved a lot, like over 100 axles. And I think that that is probably one of the like most beneficial cheap modifications you can do. Almost
What
anybody who has access to like a 220 welder, whether it's a stick welder or a MIG welder, can do that job with relative ease. And there are now a lot of kits available for almost all of the popular axles that you can just buy, and you can tackle that with an angle grinder and a couple of buddies in your garage on a weekend, and walk away with like basically the difference between going from like a 37 to a 42 in a lot of cases.
Wow.
what you're saying is
Amazing.
I should shave my '05 Plus that I haven't even
Yes.
touched yet.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay. So
That's a
how do you go?
fantastic thing
How
to
do
do.
you go about shaving one of these? Is there any process you use for welding that all back together? I know sometimes the castings can be finicky. For me, it
So
seems to vary.
yeah,
Um,
the front axle is a breeze. The Dana axles weld the best. The Sterling stuff is a little bit finicky, and for the
Yeah.
longest time, I didn't actually believe you could do it until Ballistic Fab actually came out with their shave kit, and I noticed that their shave kit uses a chromoly plate, and it totally just dawned on me that the reason why the Sterling axles don't weld as well is they probably have like a high nickel content,
Yes,
or
they
they're just
actually
like high,
do.
high. And so they basically like use a chromoly plate to fix that solution. And I think you could probably still MIG it. You could TIG it if you were, really worried about it, or do like a stick weld or something like that. But the critical part of the process is basically the fact that like plate steel, hot rolled or cold rolled, whichever one, is denser than the castings. So they're gonna expand and contrast at a different rate. And so you just have to modulate the temperature rise and fall so that both the casting and your plate cool down at a relatively equal rate. So what that entails is
So,
basically
what
so you
you're
bring the differential up to temperature once you've cut it. You preheat it, you burn it in super fucking hot, you get both materials red hot, and then you make sure that it cools slowly. And you can do that a bunch of different ways. You can continually keep a torch on it, like a MAP gas torch works really well, and you just bring them down gradually. You could put the housing on top of like a barbecue grill. You could put it on top of a fire. You could wrap it in like a heat blanket. Um, there are a bunch of different ways you can do that, but you just basically need to make sure that they cool together and that the casting doesn't cool faster than the plate does, because that's
what do
where you
you?
get your crack.
Yeah. What do you usually heat it up to? I mean, that's sort of a. I mean, numbers are all over the place for that. I've always heated to like 350, 400, but I've heard some people say less, some people say more.
I try not to. I try not to anneal the material. So when you get color into it, you're actually annealing the material. So you're softening it. If you just get that like nice gray color, that's usually enough. I particularly like to bake all the oils out of it. So if you go through with like the torch and basically get it hot enough where you can visually see all the oils have evaporated out of like a good like inch or two from like your cut line where you're going to weld, that's usually enough. And it's not necessarily one of those situations where you're really trying to bring it up to any particular temperature.
You're just
It's
trying to
the cool down
maintain it
process.
at that.
Yeah,
And, or
yeah,
not maintain it,
yeah.
but
You're
cool it down equally. So it can be
Yeah,
at
so
whatever
if you
temperature.
right, and the housing is so big, and like steel isn't like aluminum. You don't get the heat sink dissipation that aluminum does. Like for
Mhm.
the most part, the heat is focalized. So when you pour your weld in, your weld is really what's heating the material up to whatever it needs to be. The only reason why you're really preheating it is so that you get some temperature into the surrounding area, so that after the weld is done, that area isn't wicking heat away so fast that it causes the crack. And then you maintain the cool down process and keep your heat on the casting so that it doesn't cool too fast. Since it's porous, it's going to want to basically wick heat away faster than the plate will, and that's what pulls the weld apart.
Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, I'm definitely gonna be talking to you off air about um shaving the 60. I'd have to
You
look
should
at
shave
it.
my 30. I've come to that
Yeah,
conclusion.
I think you
We can
should.
shave your 30.
Yeah,
Hell
if
yeah,
you go
let's
on
do it.
if you go on to Pirate and look up, so instead of millionaire, the first letter is N. It's Project Millionaire. And in that thread, I document shaving a high pinion Dana 30 and an 8 1/4, and then putting 35 5-inch short course stickies on it and going and running buggy trails with my friends. And, proving that that axle setup can be beat on and still come home alive.
So, for actual tech here, it's probably not a good idea to use one of those torpedo heaters, right? Even if it gets up to like
What do you-
that nice gray color for the axle, and using
He's
that to
talking about
help
it.
cool off
It was
the
Well,
axle.
I mean, yeah, you can use any heat source. Like, dude, you could put it on your barbecue grill. You could put it on like a wood burning stove in your
Oh.
shop. You could go make a fire in a fire ring. Like, it doesn't matter.
I'm just
What a lot of people
memeing.
used to do is just wrap it up in like a welding blanket. But like, you could even just go get like a cheap heat blanket, like one of those ones that like plugs into the wall, and wrap it up
You
in that.
hear
Like,
that?
whatever you're doing, like
You
bring
hear
that
that,
motherfucker
Graham?
in and put it on top of your stove in your kitchen. Anything will work.
You could
I
cut
was
a hole
just
in the back of the stove and just shove the axle through.
Yeah, there you
yeah,
go.
I've seen someone
Okay,
that
well-
did that.
Jesus.
And the reason that I brought that up is when I welded up the 60 and the 10.5's trusses, I had this big torpedo heater, and it would be glowing cherry red at the tip, and I would put it about 6 to 8 inches away, and it would hold a steady like 325 degrees in the weld area, and gently taper off to about like 250 on the sides if you let it sit there for an hour or two. And then when you got done welding, we'd just flip it back on. And Graham likes to try and burn the shop down with his welding moving
I think that's
blankets.
what Richie was gonna.
Yep. That's the shade
Oh,
I
man.
was trying to throw.
We didn't talk about this in the podcast. I don't think, at least. So I now own 2 welding blankets. I'll disclaimer that right now. But I've never used a welding blanket. I've just never needed to. I've never all the heating and cooling with a blanket that I've done has been outside and generally pretty cold weather. And I don't know. I've just never really had an issue with. I've always used like stupid shit like towels or. And the culprit for our fire was a moving blanket,
Yeah.
which was a bad idea.
So other flammable shit.
Yeah. And I swear, we left this welding blanket on this thing, or not this welding blanket, this moving blanket on it and this was after we had welded the tubes on a 10.5. Tubes welded beautifully. It was a really painless job. We heated the thing up, wrapped it up, and we're just chilling, doing other stuff. Just, you know, trying to keep busy while we waited for that to cool so we can move it out of the middle of the way. Um, and then we were probably about 20 minutes away from being completely done. We were at this point kind of wrapping up, and all of a sudden we're sitting there and we look at the blanket and it starts smoking a little bit. And I you know, talk to get my buddy's attention, Jacob. And we're like, that's smoking. That's on fire on the inside. And we were like, well, we'll see. Maybe it's just something burning off it, and it enraged into a full on fire. It was a good time. So yeah, I bought welding blankets after that. So don't use moving blankets. It's a
Yeah,
moral of the story.
the fiberglass welding blankets do a pretty good job of insulating. I don't know what the R value is, but like you could use any number of things to basically just keep that heat in. And as long as the casting cools at the same rate as the steel that you welded to it, you're going to be fine. Like the
Yeah.
material isn't necessarily the problem. It's just the fact that one material is porous and the other isn't, and so one will cool at a much faster rate.
Yep.
So, really, really quick, I just want to touch on those welding blankets because they're amazing, but there is one golden rule. If you use it to cover your windshield while you weld your cage, if there is any hole in it whatsoever, the weld splatter will find that hole.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's why it's best just to not use one at all. That way the weld splatter is evenly dispersed across the whole windshield.
Across the
That's the big
Uh.
brain play.
I just keep it on the passenger side. All my weld splatters over there.
Yeah.
Um,
But
oh,
I
sorry.
definitely think you should shave your axles, and I definitely think you should just buy like the ballistic
I
fab
just
kit.
I think
It
that'd be
makes
a
it
fun you're, I just feel like it's not a lot of work, right? You're just shrinking what's already
it's more
there.
it's
It's
more
some
work to
work.
disassemble the axles. Yeah,
Yes.
the biggest thing is like making sure because you're going to get all sorts of material like inside the housing. You
Mhm.
have to make sure that you flush it really good.
Oh, it's
So
it's covered in rust right now anyways. It's got to get fully cleaned. So like
yeah, but
that
but
wouldn't
what
be
I'm
a
saying
stretch.
is like yeah, but what I'm saying is the like weld splatter
Mhm.
and all of your like grinding dust and stuff gets down into the pores of the material, the axle. What's actually a good
Oh.
idea is to paint the inside of the axle when you're done. So if you'll go through and basically like burn all the old oil out of the pores, so take your map gas torch
Mhm.
and just make sure that it's completely clean. You can get like Rust-Oleum primer, like the red oxide primer, and just paint that stuff on with like a paintbrush, so it's like super thick,
Mhm.
and that will seal any of the contaminants into the metal, like that's stuck in the metal, and you won't have bearing failures because that is actually what I do see is like people will shave their axle and then like up inside like the pinion bearing like drain
It
back or
just
something
getting
like
filled with
that.
shit.
Yeah, like someplace they can't really get to clean
Yep.
properly. And then they have like a bearing failure that then takes out the ring and pinion and they're like, oh, this piece of shit. And it's like, no, you just had a ton of deflection in there because your bearings got wiped out.
That's a good point. I mean, when you don't have a shaved axle, there is kind of that nook at the bottom. I mean, maybe I'm, coming out of left field with this, but there's like a trough almost below, at least on the 10, no, I think it was on the 50 because the
Yep.
50s.
Most axles have it. Yeah.
But when you shave it, you get rid of that trough, so all that shit's just constantly going through there. So you really got to be careful about contaminants.
I
That's
I
a good
I
point.
I like to put a little magnet on like the end of the fill plug. So like you can just go get like some rare earth magnets or whatever, and just stick to the end of because like most of your aftermarket diff covers have, a 3/4 plug or something in them anyway, pretty
Mhm.
decent size. Put a
See,
magnet on the end of that.
this sounds like the perfect time to just use grease.
in the axle.
Yeah,
Yep.
fuck yeah.
So I've played around with that, and
Oh, really? Oh,
Really?
yeah.
Come on.
So I've tried grease, I've tried like just straight STP, and in both cases it does actually seem to work. I don't think that it actually is hindering anything for like a trail rig. Like you couldn't run it on the street that way, but like on a trail rig, like grease will liquefy at temperature, and then like STP, it's a very thick viscosity, and it's not bad for the roller bearings or anything like that to do it that way. But the problem is when you do need to service the axle, everything is sticky. And so you basically, yeah, so you have to be in like a very, very clean environment. Like it's one of those situations where like unless you have a parts washer available to just like get all that shit out of there, you're gonna contaminate the grease or the STP or whatever, like even like Lucas or something like that. And so you would never be able to put back together the differential clean enough. So it's like kind of a losing battle. Like, yeah, it's great the first time you put it together, but hopefully you never have to take it apart because if you do, you're going to have all sorts of just foreign material in your differential at that point.
And how long
Never
would the
thought about
grease
it that way.
actually last?
How long did it last?
Yeah, like before it's slung
I
out
don't.
of the
I mean,
bearing.
no, it's not going to kill the bearings or anything. Like, think about it this way: like most all of your tapered roller bearings are basically dictated by the preload. Like that's what causes them to wear. Trailer bearings in are greased and they're fine, but then there's oil bath axles. There's nothing fundamentally different between those two bearings. Like it's not like the material is any different. So as long as you're keeping the material, um, the hardened surfaces clean between each other, and they have something to help lubricate them, and they're not being overheated, like you're not going to have a problem. So I think that the biggest issue that anybody would have, like if they tried to run something like grease or gear oil in an axle, would be heat. So like I don't necessarily think I would like highway drive something like that, but like for a rock crawler, you're never going to experience like overheating issues.
That's interesting.
Come on, fucking
My
axle. What's happening?
my reasoning for asking about it is I work on a lot of industrial stuff like presses and whatnot, and we have to have greasing systems on our roller bearings, otherwise the roller bearings will throw the grease out of them and then they will gall up and die.
Yeah. That's
Like
because they're probably running like at a really low temperature, so the grease doesn't ever like really get liquefied.
150, 200 degrees on a bearing.
Yeah, I mean that should be enough to at least get the grease where it's fairly fluid. Um, yeah, I mean that's definitely probably something that could happen. And in particular on a differential, I think that what you would end up happening is the oil is supposed to sling off the ring gear up into the pinion. Uh, like there's a channel that it basically goes up into and it hits the head bearing and the tail bearing. And if you didn't have grease up inside there, like you would definitely have problems. But like I said, I've played around with it in different axles over the years, and like I never had a bearing problem. I didn't have like anything that was like a catastrophe. It didn't come apart or wear anything out. But I think that ultimately it just makes the axle unserviceable. And I don't think that you're really getting anything out of it. Like I'm sure it does cushion um like shock loading, which was like what I was trying to do with it. But if you're not breaking parts, like you shouldn't have portable shock load issues in the first place. So like I would focus on just not breaking parts instead of trying to fill your axles with grease.
That's kind of logical, and you said you listened to like 20 episodes of this podcast, so I'm gonna have to reject that off the rip.
Yeah, I figured.
Um, you know, so I'm gonna go and buy two more sets of mile markers, and we're gonna call it
I
a day.
still I No, I still think that you should put some 35 spline stubs in it and a set of Warren premiums, and then just not have fuses that break at all and just wheel the whole weekend like without failure.
Yeah, That
He has a point.
no, not gonna happen. All next
So the Warren
season now.
premiums, no, the Warren premiums are infinitely stronger than the hubs that you're using. And if you're gonna buy premiums, you might as well buy it for like a 35 spline shaft, because if you do put premiums on a 30 spline shaft, then all of a sudden your fuse becomes the shaft and not the lockout. But like you're still going to be doing exactly what you're doing right now, where the hub is the weak link, and that is the easiest thing to change. So by putting 35 spline stubs in, which are cheap, you can get like a pair of them for like, what is it, like $200 or $300 now? I don't actually know. I haven't bought them in a long time, but I'm
I
talking about like
think
maybe $600 or $700 for a set of lockouts and a set of shafts, and you're set, and you're still doing exactly what you're doing now, but actually not breaking.
yeah, but that's like logical, and the whole point of
That,
this meme was to be illogical.
yeah, maybe your
Okay,
friends can
well,
all get together for your
that makes
birthday
sense.
and pitch in. Everybody pitches in like $200 for your birthday and buys you a set so that they don't have to sit on the side of the trail when you break next time.
Yep.
It's really not that bad of an ordeal. It's normally up and running in like 15 minutes, assuming that I have the hubs in the woods. And when I have the
Yeah,
Well,
that's
hubs
mine
in the
doesn't
woods,
break, and
they
you're
don't break.
how many times have you had to go and buy hubs though? You're talking about like, oh, it's not that bad because it's like a
Oh,
hundred
Luke
dollars.
doesn't wheel enough to have to buy more. I think you bought one box of hubs over what
Oh,
you had originally, Luke. I've
Um,
bought plenty.
I bought 3
You bought
total.
3? All right. I
I
think I
mean, with a
borrowed one
Dana
from you.
60, what I guess what I'm trying to understand is like, what are you afraid of breaking in a Dana 60?
Oh, it's not even that I'm afraid of breaking anything. It's just I've been able to warranty each set of hubs one time, so it hasn't been that big of an ordeal, and we're talking about that money being spent over 3 years. So it
The two-wheel trip.
more like 15,
Okay.
20.
Yeah.
I'm not
15,
that
20
cool,
over. Yeah, no, it
but
does.
I did wheel it
So what's
quite a
that?
bit, and then
So,
I
so you're
moved.
saying you broke? So you're saying you've broken like 4 hubs over 15 trips?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty fair.
Okay, that's not so bad. I still think you'd be better off to not break any,
And you're
but I do
absolutely
understand.
right.
Yeah,
But
I get
I,
I get what you're doing, and I don't have a problem with people creating like a fusible link that's like easy to replace. Like in my Jeep, my drive shafts are my fusible link, and I just have extra drive shafts, and I just bolt them in. They're super easy to put in, and but I do get what you mean.
and it's one of those things where it's also made it super easy to have a set of spare axle shafts because I can just go grab them. When I used to live in Connecticut, um, I was friendly with one of the local junkyards, so I could walk out of there with a set of unit bearings and shafts for 150 for everything. And it was just, all right, I broke one. I slapped another Spicer 7, or not 760. What is it? I forget
It's
the
a
designation.
1550.
Nah, 1480.
Oh yeah, 1480 and up.
533, I think, is the joint designation from Spicer. Um, so it was like for less than $200, I had a set of spare shafts, and if the hub popped, the hub popped. I had another box in the Jeep ready to go. It was never like any real money invested in it, and
But if it doesn't break like that, which has happened on mine several times, it happened twice that it blew the stub shaft, fucked everything up.
which
I had to get a new
actually I
unit bearing.
find really fucking interesting because it happened to you.
Yeah, with smaller tires and
Yeah,
uh,
Well, here's another thing we were talking about last night is like one of the excuses was like, oh, if you go 35 spline, you have to like take the unit bearing and have it like machined out,
I
you can
have to
actually run like
machine it out.
a hole saw.
No,
Yeah,
no.
but you can run a hole saw down through the middle of it on like a
Yeah,
drill
that's
press and
just as
move it
much
home.
effort as me setting it up in a lathe and actually doing it right. And both
Well,
of
if
which
you
are
have access,
lazy.
yeah, if you have access to a lathe, but like a lot of people, the reason that they don't do a 35 spline shafts is they don't have access to a lathe, and they look online and they see that like the unit bearings already set up for 35 spline shafts are like $350 a piece. So it's,
Oh
Yeah,
no,
brand new
$700.
one. That's not that bad at all. Brand new ones are like uh
225 online.
225.
My point,
I just got a set of brand new O5s for less than that, so
well, my
Yeah,
point is like you can cheaply use a set of old shitty unit bearings and just mill the inside out. And then if you ever have a unit bearing come apart, they are serviceable. Like you can knock that ring off the back of them and take them apart, and you can basically reuse like this what's technically like the spindle inside of like a new bearing, or you can even actually replace the bearing in it if you take it apart. So
Oh.
if you
I
go to like a bearing supply shop, you can buy those ball bearings.
I should probably stop being lazy and just put a set of flanges on it and like actually almost care and do the 35 spline outers, but
well, because you
Dude,
got the 60, so it makes sense. I
Yeah.
For me, my biggest worry was that I was going to blow an inner shaft instead of the outer shaft because they're the same spline
So
count. But
for
never
you, for you, so here's the secret on the 50. The 50 uses a Dana 44 carrier
happened.
with just a slightly larger bearing. You can put a Dana 44 35 spline spool or any locker of your choice in the 35 spline flavor into your Dana 50, and then put stock Dana 60 shafts in it.
Huh. And then
That's
they'll
all.
slide right in, and that's
Yeah.
huh.
Yes.
Okay.
There
Interesting.
might be a little bit of like a spline engagement, but there's plenty of spline there. You can totally do that. And then the weak link becomes the pinion shaft. So the Dana 30, Dana 44, and Dana 50 all have the same
Which
pinion
is
shaft
plenty
diameter.
strong because
Yeah, I mean,
it's plenty strong.
so like high pinion Dana 44, like Bronco F-150 axles, a lot of guys will kind of get to the point like once they do RCVs and 30 spline like stubs and 30 spline inners, that usually is what breaks is the pinion. Uh,
Yeah, it makes sense.
and it'll just actually it'll shear at like the tail bearing, like basically at the end of the splines where the yoke goes on. And it's like, dude, a ring and pinion's like $180, $220. It's a pain in the ass to put it in, but like realistically, it's not like it's a ton of money.
Yeah, as long as you're
And I'm
break, right?
and I'm also yeah, and I'm also of the opinion that like people should be tearing apart their rigs every couple of years and preventatively replacing a lot of those parts. Like if you take any hardcore rig and like pull the diff covers apart, if they've got like 5-year-old axles, you'll find stress cracks in the ring and pinion on it.
Every time.
So,
I've
yeah,
been looking
so
at my 10.5 or 10 and a quarter, whatever you want to call it. I think technically it's a 10 and a quarter now. It's got problems. I should probably swap it. I don't know if I'm gonna have time to, but I should swap the gear set on it just because I've had it in service for a while and it's got some stress marks on it that are
yeah.
not ideal. And I don't really want it to blow up on the first day of my next trip down to wherever the hell I am at, and you
But
just
that's
ruin
what
my
makes it
weekend.
fun.
No, that's not what makes it fun. That ruins the entire
No.
weekend for me. It makes me
Lame.
question.
I would
everything.
actually rather have had your break than my embarrassment. So,
Yeah, yours sucked too. I'm not gonna.
I think
Both
that anybody,
situations suck.
I mean, ultimately, most people when they go on a trip, like they're spending a pretty decent amount of money to go on that trip, and so, it's one of those things where like, if you're going to spend $1,000 let's say like you're going to go someplace that's far away, so you're going to drive there, you're going to have all sorts of like food expenses and lodging expenses and just the time off work that you've taken. Like most people try to do like a 3-day weekend and all that stuff. Like you're investing a lot of money into this thing that like could potentially be ruined by a failure. And so for me, it just makes sense. Like just go through everything and
Not have to
preventatively keep
deal
it
with
from
that
breaking.
failure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Learn that
Which is
lesson.
why a lot, well, and that's why a lot of people end up on like the snowball effect where it's like, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to do this. And if I do this, and when they're building a rig, they don't want those failures. But I guess what I was trying to get at earlier, whenever I was like, keep the 30 and the 9 1/4 is you can actually keep those components and it also be reliable. You just can't go down the same path that a lot of people do, which includes adding 2,000 pounds. It has to stay a 3,400 pound Cherokee at root. Sadly, you can't put a huge halo cage on it and a
Yep.
ton of body armor and start, just throwing a bunch of gear in the back. It's like you got to leave the spare tire back at camp. And I know you have a set of spare shafts and a spare drive shaft and all that stuff, but
Keep
leave
on the
it back at
trailer. Yeah.
yeah, and the big Yeti cooler, like, sorry, that's got to stay. Pack yourself a small, like, 6-pack cooler. And, when
Waters,
hardcore,
fucking waters only. All right, boys.
Don't
and
let
that-
Dwight hear that.
Hot water.
Yeah.
Hot water. If it sits on the floor, it's gonna be hot.
Guess what? If you drink them all, there's a stream over there. Get fucking sipping. I don't know what to tell you.
but seriously, it all adds up, and it's
Yep.
just, sadly,
yeah.
that's what takes axles out in a lot of cases.
Well, that's, I think I've said it on other episodes, but I'm gonna just say it again to piss people off at this point. My rig's 5,200 unloaded, but you add a spare tire, or you add tools, you add myself, you add the girlfriend, you add spare drive shafts and some spare axle shafts, and you're at like 58 without a
It's not hard
problem.
with a passenger and like all your gear, it's very easy to add 600 to 800 pounds to something.
It's really fucking easy to do. Add a full
That's
tank
fair.
of fuel and a spare.
Yeah, that's
and
what I was about to say. Is like you add what's an XJ is like 18 or 19 gallons, and it's like almost was it 8.5 pounds a gallon or something like that. Like
Yep.
that's a pretty sizable amount of weight too.
This is why we switched to the powdered gas, guys. We're learning. We don't do pre-mix.
This is what the water bottles are for.
Hey, this is a good transitionary time. So you guys talked about turboing a 4-liter on the last episode, and I am actually building an LJ right now with a very crazy turbo motor.
Ooh. What's the motor?
So it is a Bishop Buell 4.7, and it's stroked using a scat crank, scat rods. It's 9-to-1 compression. It's an aluminum head that's ported with LS valves. Can't remember the cam profile. This is a friend of mine's Jeep, and so you'll have to bear with me because he's done most of the parts ordering on this engine. But we're putting a 72 millimeter turbo on it.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
What?
so it's 488 lift on the intake side and it's 507 on the exhaust. So it's not a very large cam. It's 113 degree lobe separation, but we're running the 1.7 Harlan Sharp rockers to basically get the lift that we need out of the cam. And the idea with the build is we're going to basically run it because it's going in a rock crawler. We're going to run it on really low boost on the trail. So it's going to be like NA power, maybe like 3 psi at most. And so you're going to get all of the benefits of like the stroker motor. And it should be like a good 320 horsepower stroker motor. But then on the street, it's going to be capable, like the motor is built to take 20 pounds. So like it's way overbuilt for the application. We're running a 72 millimeter turbo just to help with heat because we don't want to have overheating problems on the trail and stuff. It's got a big front mounted intercooler, and we'll probably run it at like 10, 12, maybe 14 on the street. and it should be able to put like 550 to 600 at the crank.
Oh God.
Wow.
In before split crank.
In
Well,
before
so
the
that's the thing.
split motor.
No, it's a scat forged crank. So the entire rotating assembly is forged. Pistons, rods, crank. So there's not really an issue with that. Really the only weak link is like the fact that the 4-liter has too few cam bearings. Like the cams start to get some like weird harmonics in them. But for the most part, I mean, it's if you look like at what Newcomer does, it's basically the same motor that Newcomer made, I think, like 900 horsepower out of on meth injection.
God. That's exciting.
So that's going, yeah. So that's going in an LJ. I built a whole frame for. So it has like a much higher front frame rail and moved the box up and changed some of the geometry with the steering and stuff with the JK axles. It's got basically Dynatrack JK crate axles. It's a JK 44 front and a 60 rear, both with the Pro Rock center sections. And then it's AW4 and a rock track. And we're putting it's an '06 Jeep, so we're getting rid of the new generation, like Chrysler, Mercedes, 4-plug PCM, and we're going back to the 3-plug JTEC stuff and basically running like a Cherokee wiring harness in it.
That's gonna be wicked.
Yeah, and then we'll just tune it with HB tuners. So Flying Ryan down in Houston is going to do all the tuning on it.
Flying Ryan is one of those OGs that's just kept going forever and a day.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like people who have been there, done that, I feel like he's been around the block for a long time, and then he happens to be right down the street from this guy's house, so it's like he's in his backyard.
That's
So
convenient.
whenever I'm done with the hardware side, he can deal with the software side.
That's a wickedly crazy build. I'm not trying to cut this episode off, but we're rapidly coming up on our 2.5 hour cutoff limit. So maybe we should consider winding it down and spooling up another
Listen here,
episode.
We got 15 minutes.
Well-
Let's keep talking.
I'm
You guys haven't
sure.
really gotten a chance to ask me too many questions. Is there anything that y'all want to know?
Yes.
Cody, hit it out.
All right. How the fuck do you afford to run tires when you're drifting? Like, that was one of my, like, I think drifting is like one of the coolest fucking things.
Brings it right back to drifting.
Yeah, because fuck
Those
you,
are your
Ram,
blue collar
suck
drifting.
my fucking balls, okay? I think this is okay because I can talk to anybody about their fucking fancy tires and this and that and the axles. It's like,
I was
what the
expecting your
fuck?
tire question. Where's your tire question?
I am.
What's your
Why
favorite
can't I wrap
tire?
it up in the drifting conversation, huh, sir?
No.
Well,
I
mean, we're probably gonna end up going another 45 minutes, but
I'm
don't-
all for extending this one past our limit.
We literally make rules just to
as an
fucking break them.
exception.
Why
Yes.
why wouldn't we cut it off early so that way we can have more conversation to have the next time he comes on? Huh?
I don't. I like 3-hour podcasts. You know, you guys could Joe Rogan it up in here, and I think a lot of people would be okay with it.
Well, that's good to know, and it's good to hear that from a listener who's on the podcast because you've been able to kind of see both sides of it. So that's
Am I
yeah.
the first person that like am actually a listener?
No, we've
No.
had quite a few now that are. Okay, let's put it this way. You're like the second person who's a listener that isn't also a friend of ours, like originally.
Okay.
Who was the
Alright.
first?
Chris,
Hi.
Joshua.
Oh, okay.
Then we had Ryan.
and we also had Kyle Raden last
episode?
week.
Yes, but he was not a friend. He was not a fucking personal friend of ours.
I thought that's who you were listing, retard.
No, I said personal friend of ours. Like, I was not friends with Kyle before the episode. I mean, and I wouldn't even consider Hackbar a listener. I was gonna say friend as a joke, but like kind of felt bad.
Everyone
saying
fucking
it.
hates him.
God, I hate that fucking guy. He's just so cute. Anyways, yeah, like you get to see both sides of it where like you actually are engaging in the conversation. You're able to have like a proper opinion that I personally value. Because yeah, for somebody listening, they're like, "Oh, go to 4, go to 5 hours." It's like, yeah, but to have a conversation with somebody that you don't know that well, or you're not sitting in front of their rig or something like it takes a little bit of effort. That's why this 4-person dynamic that we roll with, it works out because you have your technical questions from Graham, you have your technical and interesting or random questions from Luke, or he has to ask it kind of a thing, and then you have your raccoon facts from Richie and I, or you'll have the random spurts of information that like Richie has this wicked fucking cool dynamic. Who dropped?
Graham just dropped. His internet
Oh.
just died. He'll be back in a minute, so let's
Okay,
not
no worries.
go off into his category too far,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we'll let
What
it
I'm-
rip.
like sometimes like Richie has this really fascinating thing that he does where like he'll just be he'll be listening like happily listening too, which we just recently found out that I thought this whole time Richie was just bored out of his mind, but no, he's happily listening, and then he'll come out with these questions that bring such good conversation that you would never like I don't know, sometimes they're just so random. It's like, holy fuck, good on you, Richie. Like that was a really damn good fucking question, man. Like, and
I will say, you guys do a good job of conversing amongst yourselves. I think you would be surprised by how good some of your podcasts would be if you guys would just do like a crew show where it was just y'all talking, and then whenever you do have guests on, make it where it's like more focused on what the guest has going on. Because every once in a while, I have been frustrated because you'll get off in the weeds about some stupid stuff where it's like it's fun conversation, but I wish I had gotten to hear more than 45 minutes from the guest.
yeah,
But
I feel like that was just a guest or two ago too.
and
yeah,
it's tough though because you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't force the horse to drink.
for
And
sure. Like I'm one of those people. Like we're just scratching the surface. I'm a very opinionated person that has a lot of divergent ideas that like go against a lot of like what the status quo is. But a lot of people aren't going to be like willing to just blabber,
Correct.
or
Yes.
yeah.
And I think also some people get nervous. They don't feel that they should. Sorry, the fart can't pass my house. I don't know if that came through. Anyways, like they feel that we want to be the ones talking, where when we have guests on, like we want them to talk. Like you have done incredible towards that, where you will just go and go and go, and then when one of us picks up on it or like picks up our end of it, you do a great job of then bouncing off of that. So
Yeah, Tyler was another really good one for that, as was Nick LeBlanc and Dwight.
I enjoyed the one with Nick LeBlanc. I think out of all of the episodes that I've listened to, the one with Nick LeBlanc was the best. But I still walked away from that one wanting to hear more. You guys cut it off at like 2.5 hours, and I could have easily listened to that for another hour.
a lot of people.
Especially some, like, yeah. He's an interesting guy, and I think that like for the most part, he is a very like rational person where it's like he has his opinions and stuff like that, but he realizes this, that, and the other, and he'll definitely like call his own self out on it and stuff, and like that I think is what showed through the most in that episode is like he's just a real person.
Yeah.
Whenever I listen to stuff like Talent Tank and some of the other off-road podcasts, a lot of the people that come on are like industry insiders, and I got the idea that like Nick is a builder, like he builds like professionally and stuff like that, but like he wasn't on the podcast to really push that like his brand or like to put out like a PR piece like a lot of the other podcast interviews seem like they do.
Well,
And,
that's really
I think that's
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying like I think that's the best part of this podcast is like it's very unstructured, and I think that it's able to
So
pick up
true.
on like the truth. Yeah, it's able to pick up on like the truisms and allow people to to actually be themselves and not have to put up a front.
Well, we're also a really bad spot to push your brand. Um,
We do,
Yeah,
we are
yeah,
not
yeah.
the best for
but
it.
I don't even mean that like in regards to the amount of listeners that we get or anything like that. I mean that in regards to we're here to talk with you. We want to know what makes Action Fab Action Fab. Who is this Chris dude that is behind it? Because there's a lot of internet lore, and internet lore is not good for branding. I mean, it's good for branding, but it's not good for conversational selling your product. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you can't.
I just really like it whenever people just come across as genuine people. Like I think the best conversations I've ever had were around the campfire on a wheeling trip. And whenever I listen to this podcast, it's basically being like a fly on the wall to those conversations for the most part. Now, don't get me wrong, like not all the episodes that I've listened to have been that kind of enjoyable experience. Like I think um the one with like the 7 slots guy, like I was screaming at the phone most of the time, being like, "What the fuck?" But for the
That
most
was a
part,
that was a weird
it's
one. That was like the first person we had on that was like,
selling a brand.
No,
yeah, no,
because
selling a
we
brand,
were doing
but
it for him though. He did not come on asking for that. To be fair, his
Yeah,
like obviously he was more of a I don't know, like he would have pushed us further than we would have pushed him. I think I think his separation from it was that he is not his builder for his rig, correct?
yeah,
So I think that's the difference is like we brought him on because we know that Angel, correct is his first name, right?
Yep.
yep.
Yeah.
Is a great guy. He's an awesome person, and that we know of him through the industry. But I think the guys who like the technical talk, which it seems you enjoy, but then you also enjoy the personal side of their technical talk, and why they feel a certain way, and why this could work because of how they did it or whatnot, he missed on. But
yeah.
I can see where you're coming from though, for sure.
Okay,
And
and
I'm not trying to shit
No,
like
no,
shit
no,
on
no, you're
you.
good.
I'm just pointing out like anyway. I like y'all's podcast. I
we're
think
not
it's
in
fun.
podcast, right? What happened
No,
here?
we
Is
are.
somebody
We are.
okay? We are
Oh
cool
yeah.
because
Oh
somebody
yeah.
else is recording. All right, so now I'm
Yep.
back in,
Luke,
and we
we're
can
recording, right?
piece it all together.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
thank
cool.
fucking
Oh,
Christ,
so
dude.
So I've got my
I didn't even
recording.
think
Luke's got
about
his.
that.
Yeah, sorry about that. My
That's why we
yeah,
do too.
my roommate when he turns on his computer will blow the fuse almost consistently every time, and it's yeah. So we're working on it. I don't know why. It's very odd. That's now we're blue
Because it's
collar.
probably
So
confused.
all right,
It is
so
all
back
one
to the
piece. I
original.
don't know why. Yeah. Anyways,
All
let's
right,
continue.
so let's get back to the original question
Okay,
that was asked. How do you afford
How do
diff
you afford
tires?
the? Yes.
So the way that you do it is you buy them in bulk, and you
Oh,
get dealer pricing in bulk, which is usually 30 to 40% off.
How many tires
And
is bulk?
so usually it's like pretty well comparable to running a sticky on a Jeep. Like
Okay.
if you bought like 30 tires and they're normally $150 and you got, let's say, like all of them for $100 a piece, that's $3,000 or whatever, and that could probably last you a season.
That's
huh.
wild. I never
Like,
thought
Wow.
about it like that because, like, I bought my 40-inch Nittos, and if I sell my 40-inch Nittos, I'm selling them for almost what I paid for them. I'm not
wait,
selling them at a discount.
Luke, are they
And
Yeah,
nittos?
but like most people don't really do that when they buy like a wheeling tire. Like they usually wear them out, or like they cut them and have to buy another one, or whatever.
yeah,
But I mean, like right now, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've looked at crawlers, but they just had like another price increase, and like I think 37-inch red is like 830 now.
damn. Uh, you know,
God,
So,
back to
I'm
my
definitely getting
point
what's that?
mine
though,
vulcanized. Holy shit.
I'm not it's not something where I'm going to wear through that money that quickly. Like in I expect to get 2 seasons, 3 seasons out of a set of tires. if I'm
You want to
buying
know
them brand new.
the sad thing is drifting is the cheapest motorsport that you could get into.
No,
Yeah.
I'm sure like go-karts are pretty cheap.
No, you're going to buy tires every time you race for a go-kart. You're going to have to do yearly teardowns on the engines. Like any type of like not professional, I'm sorry, but like grassroots racing is going to require quite a bit of money put into tires. Like most of your circle track tires, even like they're going to glaze over. They only have so many heat cycles that they can go through before they harden. Same
Oh,
thing with like road course tires. Like you're going to end up with like a ton of life left on a tire that just doesn't grip anymore. And if you want to be competitive, you're going to have to replace them. And
So
so
you
like
want to
karting,
tell
talking
us
about
about that?
tires.
Your short course tires? Because that was a cool little snippet of your Jeep's history.
so the short course tires were fantastic, and I wish that you could still get them, but sadly, Score changed the rules, and I think it was 2017 or 2018, and the entire series went to a DOT legal tire. And when they did that, all of the manufacturers stopped making the stickies. And so now the issue is there really isn't a viable 35-inch sticky option. There are some side-by-side tires that
Yeah,
look attractive that are in like the 34-inch range. Um, but
stuff
for the
radial
most part,
side tires.
yeah, I mean, for the most part, they're kind of a little bit on like the thin side. They're not really meant for the weight of like most full body rigs. So like if you're gonna put it underneath like most of your like, four-door XJs or something like that, I would be afraid that you would have like cutting issues. Like I think that the sidewalls would fail. But
What
I don't know
about
that. I would love to see some people start to try to make rigs that are light enough to run the side-by-side tires because that marketplace is obviously exploding, and I'm sure there's a ton of crossover that could make its way into the, you know,
what
budget
about the
wheeling
Yeah,
crowd.
35 12.5 R17 Trep stickies that are out there?
So I have a set of Treps, and I am not a fan. I think that they're churched up boggers.
Uh,
They have they have a lateral chevron tread pattern that just doesn't side hill very well, and the way that the lug design is done, they tend to dig. So I'm sure that they work in a lot of places,
they do
but
dig,
for
and
the
they
places
do.
that I go,
It doesn't even have to be a side hill. It can go straight down the hill. Uh,
yeah. So I think that the Trep, sadly, its best place is snow wheeling with the way that the siping is done. I've used them in the snow and they're fantastic. But once again,
well, they
that's
have
sadly,
sipes. That's
yeah, that's
they
that's
don't.
the
That's
thing.
like
I think
a
that
quarter of the tread has them, and the rest of it's just
yeah,
solid blocks.
yeah. So to me, they just are a bogger. They're just a new age bogger. So I'm
That
not
makes
like a
sense.
huge fan. They
I'm okay with
also
that.
use an Yeah, they also use an open cell tread compound that cannot be subjected to freezing temperatures. And BFG doesn't tell you that you can't let BFGs freeze, but I don't think that you can because that's where the cracking that happens on the BFGs, like on the carcass, like the old ones, you'll notice like they'll have like it almost looks like the vulcanizing, like where it's retreaded is like coming off. That's usually from freezing.
Yeah,
The rubber
I've
compound
watched
will
that happen.
actually, yeah,
Um,
it actually shrinks and pulls
I left
apart.
mine
So
out
like
in
every,
freezing temps, and I have two out of the four tires now have leaks. And I mean,
yeah.
they're basically toast as it is, but I didn't do them any favors by leaving them out there.
So when winter comes, I always take the crawlers and put them in the basement and make sure they stay nice and warm.
Yeah,
And with the Treps, Max is specifically says don't let these tires freeze because it will ruin the tread compound. And a lot of people buy Treps used and are like, these tires are garbage, they're bullshit. And it's like, well, you bought them from somebody who has let them freeze and they're not stickies anymore. So I think if you are going to buy Treps in a sticky, like you need to buy them brand new and you need to make sure that they never freeze and you need to be like super diligent about that. And sadly, the best place that they work is in the snow and you shouldn't take them there. So,
well, that's why you
um,
just get the
but
DOTs.
I
You get some Trep radials, and you're good to go.
I really, really
Uh,
fucking like the Trep radials.
Well, they make the Trep bias in a DOT compound.
mhm.
I like the
Yeah, but
radials
those are
over
too
the
showy.
bias.
I don't like the I don't know. I don't mind the side lug on the Trep radials,
Yeah.
but
The
it's
I,
radials,
very uh
Body.
yes.
Yeah.
I
but
I do want to also preface, I've never wheeled like out west where a lot of people run Treps and find them to work really well. I do think that like the traction coefficient of particular rubbers do well on like particular rocks, and
yeah,
I am actually really surprised that the off-road community doesn't know more about like geology. Like for instance, like the rocks where we wheel here in Arkansas are like lignite and like a bunch of different types of like quartz and naveculite and stuff like that. Like nobody ever brings that into the topic of
all
like
right,
this
we
You
works
got a
on
say
this
that,
kind of
fucking
rock
nerd
and like
here.
but the oh my gosh, Racing K's group that we spoke to,
Crazy case.
Crazy
Crazy
case.
K's. Oh God, my
Racing
apologies.
case.
Sorry. Okay, my bad. Either way, they knew their rock types because that sounds like we're talking about fucking Pokemon now. But yeah, he was talking about all the different types of rocks that they have out there. So it's funny that you mentioned that because I figured that was like wow, what the heck do I need to know my rock types for?
I
And
mean, in New England we don't. We got slippery granite and not slippery granite.
With the side of moderately slippery granite because it's wet.
Warm granite and cold granite.
Sometimes you'll
So
get
from
lucky.
the, I'm really surprised by the amount of traction that you guys seem to have on those rocks when they're completely slathered in mud. Like to me, I'm like looking at that and it's like, holy shit, those must be the grippiest rocks ever because
Granite's
they're just
pretty
completely coated.
depending on the granite. Some of it can be grippy, sometimes it's
Yeah.
not. It really depends on the day.
We also
You
have what is it? Not marble. What the fuck? Brain, please work. It's might be quartz. Um, you'll get that smoother rock face in a lot of places too, and that's where you'll get the videos from New England where if there's a drop of water on there, we're pounding rev limiter in second gear and no one's going anywhere.
Do you guys pick up traction whenever it rains? Like in some of the
No, we
places, for
lose it.
instance, there's a place in Oklahoma. Most people know it as Clayton, but it's called like Green Acres. And the rocks there are wild. So like what you absolutely don't want to happen is for it to rain and then stop raining because if that happens, you're not getting anywhere. But if it's like pouring rain, you almost have better traction than when it's dry. And whenever it's dry, if it's been dry for too long, it's almost like the rocks like get like dusty or something. I don't understand it, but like
Yeah, well,
they
they need to be
almost
cleaned out. I know what you're saying
yeah,
because I've heard
yeah.
about. So we've as a off-road club that we all participate in the Backyard Built Club. We haven't gone to Field and Forest that much, but there is a club that we've talked to a few of the guys from that club. Rockaholics have been on. We've talked with them plenty. They're great guys, and they've mentioned. I've heard them talking about how Field and Forest, which is probably the most notorious park in New England, to my knowledge. Um, when it's pouring rain, they have amazing traction because it will wash all the crap off the rocks, and then it's just a rock now with some water on it, but now it doesn't have the mud and dust and dirt and shit that would otherwise keep you from gripping.
You
Yeah.
know, another weird property like that is actually Kish's.
Kishes is what 24/7 though.
Kish's
Way.
is what
Slop fest.
24/7, but when it's actually fucking raining there, you can do lines that like you know Devil's Den, which has a fucking stream running through it. The only times I've made it have been in the rain.
Do y'all's rocks sweat?
Yes.
Mm,
No idea.
Okay.
Richie's Rock Sweat.
Buddy
Yeah, the rocks here, they're like porous enough, I guess, where they get like moisture like real deep inside of them. In the summertime, they'll sweat. They don't have nearly as much traction as like whenever it's super cold. So
I
that's
I
kind of
I have found that a lot of the rocks in New England do sweat.
yeah.
I only sweat when I
So,
do rocks.
so you guys are all kind of on the fence about sticky. So who is it that's on DOT tires and who's on stick?
All four of us are on
All of
DOT.
us are on DOTs. I can physically take a set of, I don't have them here, but I have a set of really beat um, BFG crawlers in a storage unit right now. And I actually just picked up a set of lightly used sticky traps in a 37 flavor. Or I will be
When?
picking them up.
Oh, I was gonna.
Uh,
This is new to us.
yeah, I'll be. I think I'm picking them up in May. No, no,
Oh
no,
my
March.
gosh.
Sorry. I don't. I'm still on the fence about what exactly I'm going to use them for. I mean, I think they'll be fine. I may just throw them on the Super Duty Steelies and run them, and because I'm used to that. Assuming those Steelies fit around my steering. I don't know if they'll fit around the Arctic. They barely fit around the Beyond Precise steering. We'll see. But I think if I run those on a Super Duty Steely, it would just. I'm so used to that 37 plus the lack of ground clearance that the Super Duty axles have always given me that it would. And I'm used to the Trep in general. I think that would just be a monster setup for me in particular. But
Yeah, I think you would be amazed by getting a shave and then like, dude, that axle setup on 37s must be very frustrating.
it
Um,
really isn't. I've never had an issue. I hang with, I mean, Luke,
so
our buddy
you
Colin.
don't dip out all the time?
I mean, I do, but I just know how to deal with it. I've never had
Yeah.
an issue. I've always hung with the guys with 42s and whatnot. I mean, there are certain things that I can't do, but it's not necessarily because of my tire size. I'd say it's generally, uh, you know, sticky versus DOT tire.
Yeah.
I don't
You
think I've
don't
ever
so
been.
when you don't get like denied from like dipping out or like getting up on something and like
One
one
time.
thing that I see the most the thing that I see the most is like you get up on something and it's like, dude, if I could just get this tire to crawl up onto the ledge. I've got three other tires that have made it. And this one won't because the axle is sitting at an angle at the back and the dip is basically plowing the bottom lip. And
Rarely, but
when
if
I,
I'm not dumb, I can usually work around that. And especially with the Super Duty rims, which suck everything in, it puts you at a slightly, you're a little narrower than anybody running an
yeah,
aftermarket rim. So I think that helped me.
yeah, I agree that the narrower track width. Do you know what your track width is?
81.5 inches.
So like
Yours?
the easiest way to the the easiest way to know is like if you have like an 84-inch wide crawler, like how much room is on each side of the tire, or can
Yeah,
you even get on
Yeah,
it's
the floor
well, I
without
mean,
driving over
81.5.
the fender?
that's what you were at, Luke?
Yep.
Okay, well, my tires, the 37s were 12 and a halves, not 13 and a halves.
So then
It was
subtract an
probably
inch
it was
off of
probably
that.
just barely. If it was 79 or 80, I'd bet.
It
And
would be
now I sit at
80.5.
like 80 something. I forget.
Yeah.
With the
Okay.
new setup.
And the other thing that I will say, not to stroke Graham's ego, but he is probably the best driver in the club, hands down. Um,
Yeah, seat time, man. I mean, like just becoming a good driver, absolutely better than any upgrade you could ever do to a Jeep. And it's not talked about. Like there are so many people that are just like, oh, I have to do this because I can't make the trail. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I go ahead.
uh, just talking to Cody, like lockers are helpful, but it's
No, because it doesn't matter. If you can have phenomenal line choice, but if you can't get power to the tire that you want that is gonna have the most
well,
grip,
that
you
comes
can't
with
do shit.
that's sort of the same thing, and we actually saw something similar when we were at Field and Forest with some guys with some really nice TJs, but they didn't have hydro assist or any sort of steering assist. So if they weren't moving, they couldn't turn. So they couldn't turn their wheels when they were on a rock. and they had to be moving or have some sort of momentum backwards or forwards to get the tires to turn, and that
No.
would take them totally out of line, and then they wouldn't be able to do it. It's the same thing.
No,
It's just
not
lack of
necessarily,
control.
because I
Those
can
are just
know,
control upgrades.
So then are you
that
telling me I'm a
need.
better driver because I know to put it in neutral and rev it to force my steering wheel to turn when I don't have any steering assists?
Yes.
that is a skill.
Okay, well
That's
then
what they
fair.
should have done.
But like that's it. But that's so simple to me that I don't see that as
Exactly,
being-
because you're a better driver than
Yeah.
these guys with really nice TJs that didn't
That's-
have hydro assist or didn't have the ability to go into neutral and rev the shit out of it. Yeah.
That is what you're doing is you're learning all the little tips and tricks. Like I wheel a manual, and like I have this debate with a lot of people. They're like, oh, it hinders you and all this stuff, and it's like I drive with the clutch. I don't drive with the brake, and I basically modulate forward momentum by either engaging the clutch or disengaging the clutch. And I can, hit the gas and stuff like that, but like it's a totally different driving style. And
Especially when you
like, it's
have a lot
totally
of
a learned behavior.
when you've got gears, when you have all the gear ratios,
Yeah, right.
it's a
Yeah.
totally different animal. If you can
It's-
actually,
and it really has. Did you grow up dirt biking?
I did.
Like if you grew up like racing motocross or something like that, I feel like you have such a better advantage because you probably learned to run a clutch like as a kid. So there's like a lot of, muscle memory that
I
goes into that stuff.
I did woods racing too. Like I got the full extent of it all, like learning to climb rock ledges with a clutch and dirt bike and all that, and like.
and this is the kid who wheels a manual or
No,
an
I
auto.
don't-
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah. But like that's
An auto.
not by choice. Like I didn't choose to.
Okay, well I got the swap. I got everything you need.
Let's get it there. What's up with it? Let's do it.
Yeah. I think that ultimately, like at the end of the day, a manual is more capable than an automatic, but it has to have the right driver behind it. And
Yeah,
sadly,
I'm not
like,
gonna deny
if you
that.
learn on an automatic, if you learn on an automatic, it's going to be very, very difficult to go to a manual.
Yeah,
But,
but I mean, just for simplicity's sake, though, like there's less likely to go wrong when driving an automatic.
Yeah, it definitely. No, it's
I don't
totally
know.
different.
I mean-
Having done both, I
I don't
you're-
I don't think that's a fair statement. Like you can have
No.
issues out of both. Like you can have a clutch go bad, or you could burn up a transmission, or you could lose all your fluid in the automatic, or like what a lot of
but I'm
people
saying
have.
for-
and it's
yeah,
like
that's
they don't
mechanical
wanna-
error. Mechanical
For your
error.
brakes
can
in the
happen where
automatic
A
blow,
plane
and
can
then you're
fall out of the
fucked.
fucking sky, but like I'm not saying that. I'm saying for actual driver error, there's more likely for driver error.
Yeah,
it's
don't know.
easier
I
to
mean,
drive an
You
automatic.
could miss a gate on your manual shifter, or you could miss your shift into reverse when you're trying to back off a hill in a manual. It's the same shit.
yeah, like
I think
oh, sorry.
I think that with an automatic, it is easier to do technical crawling for most people out of the box. So there's a steeper learning curve to a manual. But
Yeah.
once you master the manual will make you a better driver, and you'll be able to finesse the rig and upset the rig and do little special maneuvers that are impossible to do with an automatic that make the manual more capable. But yes, the learning curve is far steeper, and you will find that the majority of people can't actually master it. Like that's the other thing. There are people that are just gifted, and there are people that just don't have it. Like I can't learn to play the guitar to save my life, but I can
Fair.
do other things. I can master them with ease. And I think that there are people that have like particular predispositions to being able to run their feet and their hands without thought, and it just comes down to like certain people can do video games and certain people just don't have it. Certain people can, paint and other people just don't have it. And I think that for driving, being able to run a clutch proficiently is a learned skill that some people just have a really hard time with. And so for those people, just run an automatic. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And the other thing with that is a lot of that comes from seat time. When I swapped over to the manual, and like I make jokes about me being a bad driver, but I think I can actually drive fairly okay. But when I
I
swapped
think you just
over,
have shitty 4 liters.
I every fucking 4 liter is a shitty fucking 4 liter. They never built a
Let
good
me.
one.
No. So you have all these like terrible 4 liter problems, and like you don't think that like compression and low end torque has anything to do with the fact that maybe that's why your Jeep stalls all the time?
My Jeep doesn't stall all the time. It just
Only
blows
when he
the
misses his ships.
yeah,
Yeah,
it just
Okay.
blows the
He stalls.
crankshaft out of the
And-
bottom.
So the reason why I say that is like I have a buddy. So out of our group, 2 of the guys run automatics, and then me and another guy run manuals. And my buddy that runs a manual, his Jeep, we're gonna put a different motor in it, I think, because he just had all these problems with it. But like I swear to God, he just has a turd of an engine, and it just stalls all the fucking time. And it's not him. Like he can drive a manual. I just think that his engine is just weak and doesn't have a ton of compression and doesn't
I
have a bunch of low end torque like it should.
With the second motor that was swapped in, the one that went in with the manual, that engine was fucking garbage. And yes, that was part of why I stalled all the time. But with the new motor that went in then, after that, it was okay until it split the crankshaft. It didn't have compression
That's so
problems.
surprising. That's so surprising to me that you broke a crank. That thing had to have been hydrolocked.
You know, it's possible.
He's surprised.
Like whoever you got it from, like maybe they took their Jeep like swimming once or twice and hydrolocked it because like that's got to be what the issue is because like a 4 liter crank is pretty beefy, and for you to break one with stock power
Kish
is
and Cody can
pretty
attest
impressive.
to the fact that it was fucking cracked.
Yep.
I believe you.
Like, you mean like new when people are calling things cracked like nowadays, or you mean like cracked like it was actually cracked? Because like the motor was definitely not cracked if you're talking like new school cracked, but like metal cracked, totally cracked.
I don't know what.
Yeah. And they got to see the camshaft come out with a lobe literally removed on one of them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, so if you had a lobe removed, that means that the one of the like either the intake or the exhaust valve weren't opening. I'm sure that probably wasn't helping the situation, especially if it was just dumping fuel into the cylinder and it had no place to get the fuel out. Like at some point, you're probably going to hydrolock just on unburnt fuel.
that's
That would make
probably
sense.
possible because it was the number 5 that just removed itself. It cracked the crank, removed the piston, and wiped the cam.
Did it break the crank on the same cylinder that it
Yep.
took the lobe off?
Yep.
Yeah.
But it
So
also
I bet you hydrolocked that cylinder.
it also did this really cool thing where it wore out the the journal bearing at the end where it's like got the V cut in it to keep it located. That also
Okay.
wore out too, which was sick. You could move that crank front to back.
Yeah, I'm starting to understand how that happened. That makes sense. I tell you what is funny. So taking my Jeep drifting, like whenever I bought it, it was just like a one owner, had like 140,000 miles, and I'm sure that they probably never took it over 2,000 RPM. It was an automatic Jeep at that. So I actually did a manual swap in it. And it was okay. It had decent power. I bought it with a blown head gasket. I put the new head on it, and it was pretty uh, un unmotivating as far as like an engine platform goes. But getting it out there and running it at like wide open RPM off the rev limiter a whole bunch has increased the amount of power that that engine has, like considerably.
You just
I,
cleaned it
I
up.
almost wonder. Yeah, I think that it just spun it really
Italian.
fast and just, yeah,
Tune
yeah,
up.
just got it really loose. Yep, that's exactly it. Got it really loose. Got everything where it's moving smoothly. You know, it actually has better oil pressure now. It used to have like a little bit of a lifter tap. That's gone. So, maybe the next 4 liter that you buy from a salvage yard, you just get out there and just hold rev limiter for a little while and just see how.
Unfortunately, there isn't going to be another 4-liter.
Oh God. Yeah, now he's out in
You
Tennessee with all
say
the trail
that.
trash guys who have got they've LS swapped every rig under the sun. So I
Uh,
can see that happening, assuming
I
you've got the
I
pocket
get
for it.
I am one of the very few people. I've done a bunch of LS swaps, and I'm just not about it.
That's fine. I'm not gonna fault you for being incorrect here, but LS is the
I
way.
can see the benefits of both, honestly. Like I can see how an LS would make a fat rig like mine actually move, but at the same
That's
time,
that's
like I've
yeah
never had an issue with the 4.0 doing what I needed to do, and I've got the gearing to back it up. So
yeah. The problem that I see with the 6 liter is it makes power at the wrong time. Um, to get an LS to put good torque numbers down, it has to be like fairly high up in the RPM range versus like your straight six platform. And so what you end up with for a lot of people is like a situation where it's not locking into the converter at the right point. And so like you kind of have to drive it throttle happy. Whereas like with the 4 liters, you can light foot it a lot more, which is beneficial if you're somebody who's looking to finesse. Now, I will say if you are one of those people that just likes to just like get into it and romp up stuff and like put on a show and make lots of noise and tire smoke and stuff like that, by all means, you will be so thrilled with an LS. But if you're one of those
I
more like technical rock crawler kind of people that likes to, pick and choose your line and not break the tires loose and try to get as much grip as possible, I do think that you're kind of moving backwards with an LS. You'd almost be better off doing like a 4-3 swap. The
so
torque curve on the 4-3 is better. Or even just like an old 350, like if you built like even like a 383, if you put the right cam in it, and that's probably one thing that a lot of people could do on the LS platform is like I see people put these big cams in LSs to make them sound good, but those cams are spec to run like at the higher end of the RPM. They're not torque cams. Like
yeah.
they don't specifically try to cam it to make optimal like 900 to 2500 RPM torque. They're trying to make dyno numbers or whatever, make it sound
nothing
cool.
is set in stone yet other than the cam. And the cam is most likely going to be I think it's a Voodoo off the top of my head, but it's an RV truck cam. It's a towing cam. It's not a cam designed for
Now, you better be
high
keeping
end.
the. I don't care about the cam. You better be keeping on manual. I don't care
I
if it's a
I am
Suzuki NV
keeping the
4500.
manual. It's just going to be an NV 4500 instead
Yeah.
of a,
Well,
you know.
if you end up needing oh shoot, I've got like the perfect NV 4500 for you, but I kind of want to use it. So, um,
Rip me.
Which one do you
so
have? Which
I
first gear?
have it's a I don't know the exact I couldn't tell you the exact details. I know it's fairly desirable. I think it's the Dodge NV
Yeah, so it's
4500.
got the
So it's got the
it's,
first gear, but or maybe it's the other way around. It's got the desirable low range gear, which I forget if I think that's the Dodge one. I could be wrong.
yeah.
Chevy
And then
has
it's got
got the 6.5
No, it's the
first.
Dodge one that does. The reason is because the Dodges, like the old 12 valves, used to run out of gearing, at the highway speeds. So they put like 272s and they had like the 61.
No, they had
And so Dodge spec
373
the
gears in the
4500.
rear end. I do know that for a
But
fact. I spent a
I'm just
lot
saying,
of
like
time with them.
when the Dodges first came out with the first gen, they spec'd the 4500 with the really low first gear. So New Venture went ahead and made that gear ratio for the Dodges, and they just continued to use it.
Yeah, so I've got that ratio. Then the Chevy higher gear ratios, whatever configuration is more desirable. Like I think that's the ratio, the Dodge first and the Chevy rest of the gears. So it's got that. It's I guess this wouldn't work for you because you're going to an LS, but it's got the Jeep advanced adapters, bell housing, and tail adapter. so you could bolt it right up to a 4.0. I was planning on putting it on my on in the J20 with the 360 because technically I'm pretty sure those bolt holes all line up, and you can just get a flywheel
Yep, they're the
machined.
same.
Yeah, you can get a flywheel machined for the 360
You
because
don't
the
even have to
4.0s
do that.
you don't even have to machine
You
it.
can use the no, you can just get the flywheel that went to the there's like two ways to do it. There's like the flywheel, I think it's for the T18 that'll work.
That'll go right in.
Okay,
So like an
I'm pretty sure
AX15
that
style. Okay.
so I'm
No, I think
looking
it's
at it
I think
now.
it's either the T18 or it's yeah, because it was either that or no, the T176 is smaller. I'm pretty sure it's the one that was on the T18.
Okay.
So I'm currently looking at the gear ratios. The Dodges had the 561 first with a much deeper overdrive. The Chevys had a deeper first with a lower overdrive. It was a 6.5 to 1 first with a 0.85 overdrive, whereas the Cummins transmission, which would be the Dodge spec, is a 561 first with a 0.75 OD.
Is that only on the second gen? Because I know that the first gens had like a really deep first because they
The
had the Dana 61 and the really high axle ratios.
the first gen used a different transmission. The
No.
NV45, yeah, it was
What did it
the
use?
they used a Getrag.
Uh,
Um, I'm 99% positive on that because it also, if I remember correctly, had a different overdrive position.
Okay.
But
So
the
it's a sorry, here to cut you off here. It's a Dodge case with a Chevy first gear.
that would make the
okay.
most sense. So that would actually be a really nice transmission, not
Oh,
for an LS, but
it's awesome. Yeah, not for an LS because of the bell housing and shit it's got on it. It's perfect for what I'm planning on using it for, but
it will
in
look
any
even
sort of
better
crawler
under your
application, it would be good.
shitbox crawler. Um,
What you keep going back and forth on your transfer case options, and it seems like you're basically dead set that you have to have a twin stick.
for mine, I don't know.
Yeah.
If I were to get a 241, I would slap a 241 in it. At this point, I just don't care. I'm tired of.
Okay. Tired of Jack John about it.
Yeah, I'm tired of jackjawing about it. I want to do something cool, but at the same time, I also realize it's a lot cooler to be getting more seat time than carrying that much.
Dude, the JK 241, that's 272 ratio, is a great transfer case that is basically free.
Oh, yeah,
And
they are.
yeah, I mean they're 32 spline front and rear output, really heavy duty case.
Really? Wow,
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, they have 32 spline outputs, and they have the big chain. The 241 is super strong. Like I have that behind my 231 doubler, and that transfer case could easily live behind a V8, not blow up. You can pick them up for like $100.
Yeah, I would run one of those without a problem at this point, especially considering what I really want is an Atlas. But if I can't get an Atlas, I would rather have something that will run.
It's funny that you want an Atlas, but you're completely opposed to chromollies or even RCB shafts.
I'm not opposed to
No,
them. I'm
you're more of an Luke. You should get an Eco box, or you should just be chopping another 241 in half and sticking that in front of it. That's
A
I feel like
231. So people can make a 231 doubler for basically free if they have access to like a bunch of blown up cheap parts.
all right. Give
So
me a
my
second. I gotta
231 doubler.
piss. I want to hear this.
All right.
uh, well, what can we talk about that's not doubler related? Oh, we can talk. Actually, you may have an answer for me on this one. So I've got an Eco box.
I have to take off. So, peace, everybody. You
Wow.
guys have a great night. Yeah, I
All
know.
right. It was good talking to you, Cody.
It was nice talking to you too, Chris. Even though I was talking to Graham right that second, but I was speaking to Chris.
Well,
Anyways, buddy.
yes, yeah.
I'm sad that you didn't speak up a little bit more. It was fun talking to you.
It was always great
He's
talking to
not so
you.
technical. He's.
I try my best, but I fall off kind of quick.
Fuck you, Graham.
I I enjoy your interjections throughout the podcast, so it was fun to be on with you.
Well, it's awesome to have you, man. I'm gonna take off. You guys continue having your conversation, and I will listen to it more when I edit this. So,
Sweet.
adios,
All right,
everybody.
cool.
See you later. All right, but anyways, back to my point here. It's still sort of in the same vein too, which is perfect. So, and I think I've mentioned it on the podcast several times, I'm sure. I've got an EcoBox. I think I put I don't know what the name of the Chevy case is. Maybe it's a 241 HD. I have an EcoBox that I put the ring and planetary setup from a 241, so it's the 6-pinion planetary, not a 3-pinion like a 231 has.
All right,
under
I'm
the
back.
EcoBox. Oh shit. Okay, I'm gonna continue because we're already here.
No. Continue.
Yeah. And I put and the whole concept of the EcoBox is you're basically taking those 231 parts that you'd have in a 231 doubler if you were gonna homebrew one, and you're just putting it in an aluminum case.
Yeah.
My issue is the shift collar, or I guess the whole shift mechanism on the EcoBox in general will pop out of gear on me only on the highway. And I don't know
Yeah,
if it's
so
the
that's a common issue with all of them. Basically, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can take it apart and take a grinder to the shift lever and make it where like the detents, like where the detent ball hits it,
Mhm.
like basically make
give it
a
a
valley
spot
for the
to live
detent
in.
ball. Yeah, you can do that, or you can increase the detent ball spring pressure.
Okay.
But what
That's
it comes
all it
down
is.
to is the fact. No, what it is the case isn't perfect, and you basically have like run out, and so whenever uh, slack hits the box, it's the gears are moving inside there enough to actually physically force it to shift. Like it just comes down to like mismatched tolerances, and under pressure, it runs one direction, and whenever you let off, it sucks the gear the other way, and it just causes it to shift whenever it does.
Yeah,
and
that
it
makes
goes into
sense.
neutral.
But what's weird is
So
it didn't start happening until I drove it. I drove my Jeep down to North Carolina, um, and it wasn't. It had popped out of gear on downhills, like steep downhills, where I'm really engine braking the thing once or twice, but never really anything that made me concerned about it. And on the way back from North Carolina is when it really started happening. So I don't know. It was kind of odd.
So
I wasn't.
there's also two like plastic feet that sit on that
Yes, I do
shift
know about
collar
those,
that can get
and
worn.
those are in good shape. I
Yeah,
have pulled it apart.
yeah. So if those aren't worn, then it just comes down to like um the case variation between like an actual transfer case and the eco box isn't identical, and it just
Gotcha.
has too much thrust. It has too much thrust um, in it. So I don't know what you could do to change that other than just up
Just cranking
the
that
amount
detent
of
down.
force.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you
Or
really want to increase the spring, because then you're just going to have problems trying to shift it. So you're
yeah,
better off just making little grooves for the detent ball to sit into so that it actually holds it stronger without actually having more pressure on it.
makes sense. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'm not 100% sure how the detent sits on that thing. I know I have tried to tighten it, it made no difference. So the detent may be the key there. I'm not sure what they have in there for that. It is kind of
Yeah,
like it's
you
a
could.
different shift collar, or the whole shift rail or wishbone
Yeah,
setup than a normal 231. But it's I don't know. The whole cable shift on that's always been kind of flaky with me. I got to talk with NWF again uh, about it to see what their take is
yeah.
as well. But
I'm not actually a big fan of like like any of those EcoBox type. Like even Atlas makes like the one that goes on the front of the Atlas, their little range box. Like they're all kind of the same thing. I personally find that just cutting a transfer case up works just as well. I guess the only thing that you gain is in some applications you can run a bigger front yoke for a bigger drive shaft. Um, but for most people, um, I don't know, it's
Yeah,
a lot
I
of
don't
money
know.
to spend on stuff.
That's
There's a
why
lot of
the EcoBox, I feel like it's a sweet spot, right? It's not perfect, and there's like there's still quirks with it, but at the same time, it's a solid chunk of aluminum, and I do know people have had issues. It goes both ways, right? There's issues with the 231 doublers people build because you know it's not a CNC'd cylinder. It's just a case chopped in half, and there's plenty of places people can fuck that up too. So I don't know. It's
Yeah, I mean,
trade-offs.
it does come down to competence a little bit with like the builder. The one thing that people don't take into consideration with like the three pinion versus like the six pinion, or the fact that it's like a cast case versus like a billet that's
Yep.
cut, is the second transfer case takes a lot of the load off of the first transfer case.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so
I've
that
never run one. I don't know if I've ever. I don't know if
Miguel
I've ever
has
run
one.
into any. Miguel has one.
Miguel has one. Um,
Okay.
and it works. I was able to blow a Dana 300 to fucking hell and back in about
And that thing was still
0.5
intact. So,
seconds.
and we don't know if that's a six
Yeah,
pinion or a three pinion. So who knows?
well, mine is a three pinion, and it's been in quite a few rigs. It was a Mad Rooster kit, which used to just be like a plate and a spud shaft. But the thing is you can take the main shaft in a 231 and you can cut it and you can weld it to the output shaft of any 23 spline Chrysler transmission. So if you wanted to, you could go to the salvage yard and you could find any Dodge pickup truck or Jeep or any of that stuff and just cut the output shaft off the transmission, take that thing home, weld it to the main shaft of your factory 231 transfer case, and cut out from steel or aluminum or anything that you wanted to a block off plate, and JB weld it into the case. It doesn't have to be welded. It's not a structural component. It's just holding the fluid in, and then just make your adapter plate, which is just a
Oh yeah.
flat piece of steel. Like it, you can literally build one for free if you just take your time and look at it. It's a very simple contraption, and they're fantastic. They don't break. You can put whatever transfer case you want behind it that will probably break because you're increasing the amount of torque that's going into that transfer case,
And
but
I'm
you're
a
decreasing
fucking
the amount of
meathead.
torque that the front transfer case is under. So
Um,
Yeah.
Now back to the little quip about the Atlas. I
Yep.
know what I'm about.
Yeah.
I build things in stages, and right now I just haven't hit the point where I want to go to the next stage because the next stage is Atlas 1410s and fully reworking the front axle with hydro and moving more towards a heavy buggy, which eventually is what that rig's going to become. It's just the path it's on.
A big blue uh bowling ball, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a heavy object.
yeah, I always just am always curious why people want the Atlases. So I've had a bunch of I've had 4 rigs with Atlases, and I've had some Dana 300s. And out of everything, I think my favorite transfer case is actually the 205 with the Lomax gears, but I don't think they make the 3
They
to 1
do.
Lomax gears anymore.
They do.
But do they? Okay.
Are those reliable? Those are I mean, I know the like there's a
they're
kit for the
reliable.
231 that blows up if you put it over 3,000 RPMs or something like that, right? And I don't know. So I've always been skeptical, but only because of that, which isn't really a fair assessment.
Are you talking about the? So you said the 231 that you're worried about?
Yeah, there's like a 4-to-1 kit for the
So-
241.
Yeah, Terraflex.
Okay. I'll,
Yeah, that one.
I actually have a lot of experience with this, so I'll clear the air on that one.
Cool.
So Terraflex is who makes it. It's the
Mhm.
Terralow. And the issue is the planetary that they spec'd for that transfer case I don't know where it came from, but it uses bronze bushings for the planetary. It's a 6-pinion planetary, and it doesn't use like a needle bearing or anything like that. And so what happens is if you spin that planetary too fast, it will actually melt the bushings. And then
God.
the planetary has deflection and slop in the gears, and it comes apart. So the reason why you can't run it at a certain, it's basically they say like, do not shift out of first gear, do not run first gear above 3,000 RPM, and that is due to the fact that the planetary will wear itself out prematurely. Now, as far as the low max gears go, as far as I know, those things are strong as hell. I don't know anybody who's ever broke them, but they shift fantastic. And that's my biggest problem with the Atlas and even like the stack. And I've never actually handled a trail-worthy fab, so maybe they shift really well too, but I have experience with the 205 with the 3-to-1 kit in it. And that transfer case, you could actually load it up and put it in a bind, and you could still shift it. It shifted like butter.
You can shift a 231 with a 3-to-1 gear.
No, 205.
Yeah, sorry, 205 with a the 3-to-1 ratio. You can shift that not on the fly, but like while it's bound
Like,
up.
so my issue with twin sticks in most applications, whenever I've actually needed it, couldn't get the damn thing to shift correctly. It's like you get it out of gear and then like trying to get it the fuck back into gear. You're like loaded up, and it's like now I'm in 2-wheel drive. I've actually had situations where like I tried to do a dig, couldn't get back into 4-wheel drive, and actually had to winch the Jeep to get it moved where it would re-engage. And that was actually, I don't think, with an Atlas. That may have been with a Dana 300, but and I think it was like a cable shifter setup. That's another thing. Like mechanical shifters over cable shifters are totally the way to go. But yeah, the 205 shifts like butter. It doesn't have that problem. You can bang shift that thing. You can take it and get it to where like, you just spin it in neutral and then just cram the shifter forward, and it'll just engage. Like it won't grab gears. It won't grind or anything like that. So I think that is a very good transfer case, but it's expensive to build.
It's not even that bad to build, cost wise. It's just it's not the reduction that I want. That gear set's less than 1,000.
Oh really?
Yeah, they came down in price.
Huh.
No, my thing with the Atlas is it shows up at my door for a not unreasonable price. I mean, now it doesn't. It didn't. It used to, I should say.
It used to. These are trying times for a lot of manufacturing things. And I mean, I don't know if we talked about it with Chris, but Mikey with his YJ buggy, he was waiting for months and months and months.
Yeah, we
that
talked
thing
about
and
that.
got nothing. And I'm pretty sure I could be totally wrong. Maybe he got it, but I'm pretty sure he canceled that.
He canceled it and he went with a overbuilt 300.
Exactly. So it's just not worth it.
My friend Trey, he just tried to order one, and it's like 9 months or something like that.
And even then, it probably won't come at 9 months. It'll be like 3 months after that. So they'll be waiting a year for a chunk of aluminum.
But that was like why I said earlier in the episode, at this point, if it ended up being a 241, oh well, it's a fucking 241 for now. I can get an SYE.
If I'm spending, how much are those things nowadays? They're got to be at least $5,000 for
GM 241's about $150.
No, I'm talking about an Atlas.
Oh no, I was talking about for behind the LS.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, I'm still on about the Atlas. I'm here to.
They're 25 to 35, depending on what specs you go with.
No way. No.
Yeah.
No, they're not. No, they're not, because that's like the base price. Then you have to add yokes, which aren't included, and you have to have a shifter setup, which isn't included, and that is like the baseline cost. By the time you get all the little add-ons, and then you pay for the shipping, which is like $300, it's definitely not that cheap. I think the cheapest Atlas I've ever ordered was like $2,700, and that was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'm
Also, on
thinking
a
like it's like
very
five.
minor side
Listen,
note,
if I'm gonna pay 5 grand for something, sorry, Luke, I'm still paying it. If I'm paying 5 grand for something, I don't want it in a year from now. I'd like it, relatively soon. Like 3 months is fine, right? I get it. Some manufacturing stuff takes a while, but like that's just ridiculous. I don't know.
And I don't think that most people even need that. Like a 4-to-1
No.
is definitely nice. There's other 4-to-1 options, but twin stick, I don't find to be particularly like useful in a lot of scenarios. Um, unless you just have like a really long wheelbase and you just need it for maneuvering, like that can be very helpful. But as
Yeah.
far as like dig, most people don't have a selectable rear locker, and line locks are like a way to lock the inside wheel.
Mm.
And that's
I
what
I
you really
haven't
need.
gotten to I haven't gotten to use mine enough. I do have the line lock for it though, so technically like it shouldn't nothing should get in the way
But
of
do,
it being able to do the front digs that I, sort of
but do you have
did it to
but do
intend
you
it.
have an open but do you have an open rear diff?
No.
Yeah, so that's what you
So
really
it's
need. And
yeah.
so that it can pivot and so that it's not dragging a tire. But like the situation for most people is they're pointed uphill, so they have the weight transferred to the rear.
Hmm.
And this is actually going to be a good segue because there is one more thing that I want to get off my chest before we get in this podcast. But weight transferred to the rear, you don't have a ton of weight on the front, so like the traction isn't great up there. You disconnect the rear, you try to dig over, and both rear tires are locked where they're at. And you can use a line lock or whatever, but even then, it's spooled. There's
Yep.
nothing that's going to allow it to spin. So,
It's not a spool, it's a Detroit locker. But yeah, same
Detroit
difference.
actually,
Same difference.
no, Detroit will actually unlock,
Yeah, it will, but I
especially if
don't
you
I
have
don't think it would in maybe in that case. I don't know. That's a good point.
yeah, it will unlock a little bit. You shouldn't drag the
Not it.
wheel, like it should ratchet.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but what I was actually going to get off my chest. So I think back to the original reason why I'm on the podcast. You guys had said that I had built this like turbo ecotech or whatever and dropped 400 pounds off the rig.
Yeah.
The reason why I believe that Cherokees wheel so well is the engine is placed like 6 inches further forward in the chassis in relation to the front axle center line than in like a TJ or in a YJ. And I think that is actually critical to how well they climb up like ledges and stuff like that. So when you get up on something like in a TJ or most of your conventional like rock crawling builds, the engine is further back and you actually end up with weight transfer onto the rear axle, whereas a Cherokee keeps the weight on the front axle. It doesn't have the weight transfer to the rear like most platforms do. And so as long as you can get those front tires to hook, it carries you up. And that's what ended up solidifying my idea of keeping the 4 liter in the front. I think if I dropped 400 pounds, like, yeah, the whole entire chassis would be, would weigh less, but
Hmm.
I don't think it would climb nearly as well. The
Yeah,
amount of weight that I keep in the front axle allows me to just carry up so many climbs that, and if you watch it in the videos, you can tell it's the front end that's pulling it.
Yep. And it's funny, and I know we talked about this yesterday too when we were talking to you. Uh, and I didn't mention it then, but I'll mention it now. Is we sort of have we talked about this and we probably didn't even really realize it because we sort of just thought that's how all rigs worked. But I mean, the the front locker in those things makes a massive difference as soon as you put one in.
Yep.
Like I ran with just a front locker for quite a while. And
Yeah.
granted, I blew factory shafts up all the time, but I immediately just started climbing everything for that exact reason. Is the front would get up something, and then it would just climb. It dragged the rear up, and then it's
Yep.
you can the rear almost is irrelevant if the front's up and your rig is
yeah,
light.
the
Yep.
welded rear axle that I run is more of a formality just for that one situation where I am diffed out and I've got one rear tire and one front tire on the ground. It's not welded because it actually matters that much.
I
Uh,
mean, don't get me wrong. I think that having lockers front and rear are mandatory in most of the hardcore stuff. But
Yeah.
I guess what my point is like, all right, let's say you have like a TJ. You are so much better off stretching the rear 7 inches and doing a doubler and leaving the front alone than what it seems the majority of people are doing right now, where they're stretching the front like 6 inches and they're moving the back 3 inches. That's not going to net you nearly as capable of a rig if you just stretch the front like 2 inches just to get your like fender clearance or whatever that you need for the bigger tires, and then primarily stretch the rear. Like the TJs, you see it all the time with the rigs that are stretched real far in the front. When they get up on a climb, like the back end has all the weight, and the front end is just up there, dancing around on the rocks and not grabbing anything.
Maybe I
So,
phrased that wrong, but like what I was trying to say is it matters, but it's not as critical as the front.
yeah, in the Cherokee, the magic sauce is the fact that it is weight biased to the front. And I think that the idea that you want like a 50-50 weight distribution in a rock crawler is a fallacy. I think you want like a 60-40 weight bias, or even something more like,
75 or
yeah,
70-30.
I don't know what the magic number really is. My rig is 60-40, and I prefer it to a lot of other rigs that I've had that were maybe more evenly split. And I attribute it primarily to the fact that I have that boat anchor in the front of it.
Mm. I always take all the shit out of my rear. Everything in the back of my Jeep. I carry a lot of shit when I drive at places.
Yeah,
When I'm not getting trailered, everything comes out. It sits on a trailer or wherever I can put it. I don't leave anything in the Jeep. Uh, Particularly for those weight savings. Like a tire in the back would probably be enough to mess me up.
yeah, yeah. I think that for the most part, people need to not carry a spare.
I can always
One thing that,
have somebody go get it. It's, or I can just
yeah,
drive back on the rim, whatever. Especially when I was using the Super Duty Steelies, I had like 7 of them just sitting on the sidelines. It's whatever. I dent one up to the
yeah,
point where it's destroyed. It's fine. The tires will handle it, just going slow back.
yeah. I mean,
Well,
usually you've destroyed a tire if it
Yeah.
can't be plugged. You probably already destroyed the tire. Another thing is like you can always just carry a inner tube, like tractor inner tubes are a great alternative to a spare, and they're super light.
Mm,
But
that's a good point.
I've
it's
never
also
once thought of that.
a tractor inner tube.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's and not even 10 pounds probably. And anyway, there's
Just
a bunch
stuff
of
it in
different
there.
types
Yeah.
of roller. Yeah.
well,
Um, you guys were also talking about like rigs that don't have hydro. My rig is factory steering, no hydro assist at all, and I can turn
No,
37
no
inches.
cheating,
Nope,
drilled out pump or
no,
anything like that either.
nope.
Factory pump.
It is a factory OEM pump that came on that Jeep with a factory OEM box that came on that Jeep. And I have been running it for 6 years, and I routinely drift it and hit rev limiter and rev the shit out of it. It is an unopened, like I've changed the fluid, but like for the most part, it's like
Just
unmolested.
as, yeah.
And the secret is scrub radius. Everybody has an offset wheel on a huge knuckle, and the JKs have a fantastic scrub radius. The center line of the steering axis is inside the wheel with a factory JK rim. And so there's no basically external force. Um, the wheel almost like pivots inside of its own little spot. It doesn't swing, and because it doesn't have all that extra like force acting against the system, I don't run into any kind of overheating issues or any of that stuff. So it's basically a matter of like keeping it from getting aerated, which I only really ever aerate the system if I'm on my side, and the factory reservoir keeps the fluid away from the pump pickup. Usually that's only for a couple of seconds, but for the most part, I mean, I've never had an issue with it, and have no need for hydro assist. It literally I can steer it one handed. Even on like the granite type rocks that are down in Texas at Mason, like those have tons and tons of traction. And like I said, I'm on a sticky, and it just comes down to the knuckle geometry.
Yeah, and on that note, I think a lot, and it didn't really come to my attention until I've moved away from the '04 Super Duty knuckle that I had. So the Beyond Precise makes an excellent. I think the Jesse Haynes Fab kit. We were talking about that last episode is also pretty good. It's basically the same style, I think, but with the '05 Plus, nobody makes a good knuckle. I'm not really satisfied with any of them. They don't.
But there's somebody who's trying to make one right now. I saw pictures of it. It's like a weld together kit.
Yeah,
But
but like the Artec one is junk. It's absolute garbage. And the other ones are all the same, right? The Barnes looks about the same as the all the other kits. The Barnes is the one that's coming to mind because the Trail Trash guys are doing that, and I've seen a bunch of pictures of that one. But I know there's a bunch of styles like that. I think the BP one looks like that too, and it's not a bad design. It just doesn't really stand out to me as being like that's the design that you want on your '05 knuckle.
yeah,
Right? The '04,
the
like I've turned people down when they've given me the Artec ones because it's like this is junk. I'm you can spend the same amount of money if you return this and get the BP, and you'll be much happier. It's just a way stronger, way easier to deal with design. It's just way better designed.
yeah, the fundamental issue, I guess, is the inner C design, and that's where most people aren't fixing the inner C design. And then also, it just uses a really large shaft,
Mhm.
and so you end up with like a compounded issue of like the amount of space that you need for the ears for a 1480 or a 1550 shaft are, it's just a size constraint issue, and so it just pushes it out. And then, most people aren't running like optimally. What you would do is run like a brake setup that would allow you to run like almost like a dually wheel or something with like a zero offset. Like let's say it's like a 8-inch wide wheel. Like if it had like a 9-inch back spacing or something like that. You see like some of the portal cars doing that to try to solve the problem that where they're pushing the axle or the wheel mounting surface out so far from the pivot point that it's just like this is not a strong setup, or it's putting too much stress on my steering components, or whatever the case is. Like they will actually go out and build a wheel to solve that problem. But with the
Mm.
110 crowd, it doesn't seem like it's very popular to do anything other than run a 9.5-inch wide wheel with 4 3/4 back spacing and just let it hang 14 inches off the center line of the steering axis. And it's like, well, no wonder you need a 3-inch freaking hydro ram to move that. Like the amount of mechanical force that the tire has over the steering is astronomical
Yeah.
versus like you look at what the JK or even like the stock TJ stuff is. It has way more mechanical advantage. The steering box does over the steering knuckles just due to the geometry.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for improvement, especially on the '05 stuff. I don't know if that is like that entails a new knuckle being cast or probably not. These days people can do a ton with all the weld-on stuff, but um I don't
I
know.
think the best thing that people could do is just run a 20-inch rim with like a ton of back spacing. And that's just going to basically come down to somebody coming to market with that option. And
Yeah.
then people adopting tires that can do that. And
And
I'm
that's
not
funny
really
you
an
mentioned
advocate
that
for
because a lot I don't know, maybe it's not 20s. I don't know. Does Chris run is it in No, it's got to be a 20, right, Luke? Is that what Chris
Yeah,
runs?
Chris runs a 20 with a 43.
Yeah. So we know a bunch of guys who do that. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched for them to just get a backspace 20-inch wheel on the 43s and suck that in on a buggy.
yeah. I, I think that's optimally what you would do. I think trying to come up with a different wheel, I mean a different knuckle is kind of defeating. Uh, just based on what the inner C design and just overall size of everything. So, but that's
Well,
probably a good place to end this.
yeah, I was just about to say, not trying to be rude here, but we're an hour over our normal cap, and I have to be up in 6 hours, so
Yeah, I think I got everything out that I was planning to get out.
we're
Yeah,
definitely
this has been
gonna
great.
we're definitely gonna have to have you back on for another nerd out session. But I think we've covered everything that we could possibly cover.
For
Cody,
now, we have for sure. I'll definitely be hitting you back up for tips on shaving my 60 because that's definitely happening because I haven't even there's still so much fab work I need to do on that thing. It makes perfect sense to just do that now. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, this has been awesome. This has been a ton of fun.
so on
I had a
that
lot of
note,
Blast.
fun, too.
keep your rig light, keep it on its side or side wall in this case,
Keep it
and
shaved.
shave.